Okay. Do you remember Lightlark? Lightlark has sold well. Nightbane has gone on to sell well. Skyshade may continue this trend. The sequel, and perhaps the next, and the next after that, perhaps they will sell too. Perhaps people will buy the new Lightlark novella next year. Perhaps there will be a movie, as Alex Astor constantly insists. It seems to be selling. I've seen promoters, not necessarily fans, but promoters compare Lightlark to Twilight recently, in their insistence on its success. It is selling, after all, but it is not Twilight. There are no wars over the love interest, no name recognition outside its sliver of infamy, no pencil cases sold in dollar stores across the nation. It is selling, but that is not the same as lasting success. But I also said something like this last time, when I thought Nightbane would perform poorly enough to wound the series' momentum. Somehow, it endures. And somehow, I do too. I mean, someone has to figure this out. Skyshade is the third Lightlark book. Fans and foe of this series alike assumed it would be a trilogy, but Alex Astor has other plans. By the ending of Skyshade, I would guess that we're looking at 5 books minimum. While the second book in the series was the same quality as the first, approximately, the third is, without question, worse. I have never seen an editor more asleep at the wheel than this. There was much mockery of Lightlark's prose when it first went viral, like that phrase, a shining, cliffy thing, that lives on in our memories. But Nightbane, I feel, face less scrutiny. Plenty of bad prose, but better. Like, I grew numb to it and I focused on the broader aspects of the book's plot. Skyshade, however, would not allow me to do this. The action scenes are confounding, the lack of description just infuriating, the sentence construction just simply bad. Odd phrases are repeated over and over again, sometimes within paragraphs or pages. There are typos and errors and inconsistencies all over the place. I have many examples to share, such as here's a sneak preview of my all-time favorite new bad sentence. The tunnel was like a hallway that split ominously. Page 220. I'm really into that line. But in terms of making a point about the prose quality, let's just kind of set up some basics here. Like, let's look at the first scene. I'm gonna read you the opening of Nightbane and the opening of Skyshade, and you're gonna know what I mean about the quality. So, this is from Nightbane, opening thing. And I'm gonna pronounce all the names right this time. Isla Crown tasted death on the back of her tongue. Moments before, she had unlocked the hidden vault in the place of mirrors. Inside, power churned, whispering in a language she didn't understand, calling to something deep in her marrow. It felt urgent, obvious, like the answer to a question she had somehow forgotten. The rest of the abandoned palace was falling apart, but this door had remained closed throughout the curses. Her ancestors had fought to keep it a secret. Her crown was the only key, and Isla thought, as she pulled the door open with a scream of a creak, that they must have hidden it away so thoroughly for a reason. Her heart raced as she peered inside, but before she could get a look at anything good, a force battled through the gap, struck her in the chest, and sent her careening across the room. The door slammed closed. For a moment there was silence, peace almost, which had become the most coveted and rarest of luxuries. It was all she dared wish for nowadays. Peace from the pain that pulsed through her chest where an arrow had split her heart in two. Peace from the thoughts that ravaged her brain like insects feasting on decay. So much had been lost and gained in the last few weeks, and not in equal measure. For that 1 second, though, she was finally able to empty her head. Until it cracked against the stone floor and her peace was replaced by a vision of carnage. Bodies, bloodied, charred. She couldn't see what realms they were from. She could only see their skins and bones. Darkness spilled around the corpses like knocked-over pots of ink, but it did not settle or puddle or disappear. No, this darkness devoured. Page 1 from Nightbane. And I'm not gonna argue with the prose because it's ultimately some of the best Astor has put out. I felt like in Nightbane, she was trying. Here's how Skyshade opens. Isla Crown watched the man she loved disappear as the world fell away. The other man she loved gripped her arm with the desperate hope of holding on to a dream before waking. Her stomach dropped, her ears rang. Clashing swords and howling drecks turned to silence. "You're home," Grim said, his voice breaking in relief. And then she was ensnared in the familiar place against his chest, her cheek below his heart. It was instinct to breathe him in, to hold him close. Home. Something in her marrow unfurrowed. Another part recoiled. She tore herself away, looked down. Her armor and hands were covered in blood. Her lips tasted of salt, sweat and tears from the battle. She considered everything she had done, everything she was. She wanted to run. She wanted to tear down these hallways the same way she had the first time they met. She wanted to portal back to Lightlark, back into Oro's arms. But she was here for a reason. Isla would either kill Oro or Grim, according to the Oracle. It was fated. Now, knowing what she had done in the past, all the people she had killed, she didn't trust herself not to hurt the Sunling King. Grim approached her slowly, tentatively. His voice was gentle. "Heart." He offered his hand again, his knuckles raw and caked in what had to be both his and Oro's blood. Page 1 of Skyshade. Both scenes involve a freshly traumatized Isla reeling from death and betrayal. Skyshade is using a particularly choppy style for this. It's not necessarily clear for only listening to me, but the punctuation is everywhere. There's a lot of dashes and dots. And I also love overusing hyphens and ellipses in my writing. But Skyshade's approach is this disorienting flip-flop of emotions and enough special characters that it's like the book survived a spill at the punctuation factory. I have never seen so many untrustworthy semicolons so confidently utilized in a novel. The writing quality is a theme that we will return to again and again, of course, from the minutiae of the prose to the broad failings of plot. I'm just highlighting it up front because I think it's a reflection of Lightlark on a whole. Perhaps Alex Astor felt the need to try with Nightbane, even a little. Perhaps the publisher decided to give it an extra look-over from an editor only half asleep. But Lightlark sells, doesn't it? It sells, and it has sold, and there you have it. How much does craft matter in the face of capital? I don't cross paths with fans of Lightlark much, but I hear a lot from people who do find something in this book, who have become kind of caught in the idea of reworking it or fixing it, trying to see what is interesting in her ideas, trying to pray that Cleo might be treated as a character, that something in this series will be a surprise in a good way. But Cleo has literally about 3 sentences in this book, and the fact that starlings have suffered slavery for generations has not been referenced since it was brought up at the beginning of Nightbane, in that one paragraph. These are topics which fundamentally do not interest the author as much as grim fan service. I do not have faith in Alex Astor to improve because she has shown that she simply does not care to. She succeeds, so why try? Her publishing schedule is breakneck, writing and releasing a book every year. 3 total in the next year. Do you think she is drafting and redrafting them? Do you think that these are passing through rounds of edits through a critical eye at all? And this is where I am with Lightlark, I think. Not mad, just disappointed. She has everything writers dream of, her own wealth and all that her publisher pays and spends on her. She has books that sell. She could use this opportunity to grow, to try, but she does not seem to have ever sat down and made a document listing exactly how her world works. Why should she? She's making money. I, however, do not have that luxury. I need to try and keep track of how this world works so that I can explain to you all the ways it doesn't. Like Nightbane before it, Skyshade disregards a large amount of world building from the previous books while introducing plot-important details which have never come up until they were needed. Keeping track of how Lightlark universe functions at this point is a scholarly task, but someone has to do it. And take my hand, this is going to take a while. Let's go to the Lightlark Primer. The Lightlark Primer. Once, there was an otherworld. It got bad there, and a large number of people fled to a new dimension. This new dimension is named Lightlark. The world of Lightlark is home to Lightlark, a magical island formed by the creators of this new world, where various populations lived in peace. These groups are the Sunlings, Moonlings, Skylings, Wildlings, Starlings, and Nightshades, each with unique appearances and thematic powers. Of them, the Sunlings, Wildlings, and Nightshades are the most powerful and important, as it was their ancestors who founded Lightlark originally. It's not acknowledged in canon that they are way more powerful and important than everyone else, but it's pretty evident and implied. The Sunling ruler has their life tied to that of the island, and is known as an origin, gaining the magic of all who live on the island of Lightlark, over a certain population threshold, as a singular wildling does not grant wildling power to an origin, but a few hundred starlings does. Magic powers work in Lightlark by what appears to be a system of trickle-down economics. It's unclear. Each kingdom has its own ruler, and if the ruler dies, all people of their magical ethnicity also die. A ruler also has to feed power into the land itself, or it will die. All people, including rulers, have very long lifespans, with rulers being quasi-immortal and just not aging at all. However, the moment someone has a child, they begin to age and die as their power flows down to the air. Having multiple children further splits the power flow. This system of dependence on a ruler is in fact a curse placed upon the people of Lightlark by the founding Nightshade and Sunling kings, a curse that is called Nexus. The Nexus curse also prevents people from using multiple elements of power even if they are of dual heritage. Only the origin is exempt as the focal point of this curse. There is one way around the Nexus curse though, it seems. It's actually unclear, but there are love bonds. If you fall in love with someone, they can use your powers and supposedly can even steal them. Love bond is a very curious term. The concept is central to the plot of the first book, but never given an in-universe name. In Nightbane, the term is used 4 times as if it had been part of the world all along, and in Skyshade, it never shows up. This inconsistent approach to world building is Aster's signature, making each book feel episodic in how aspects of the world disappear or change depending on what the story demands. Love bonds allow the one you love to use your powers, but they can also use your flair. Because the leads were not overpowered enough, rulers and important families sometimes have flairs, unique abilities not necessarily tied to their elemental powers. These are things like being immune to curses, seeing the future, detecting lies, and teleportation. Because our lead is the most special girl in the universe, whose importance quintuples this book, it's not clear how love bonds function among the common folk. But then it's not clear how anything is for the common folk, because this is a series all about how important and powerful some bloodlines are over others, and how amazing that makes the rich and royal. The world of Lightlark is inhabited by inhuman beings as well, all uniformly referred to as creatures. Some of them are people who just aren't humans, while others are horrible flesh-eating monsters. Lumping them together seems unhelpful. If a cave has ancient creatures in it, it might be full of demons, but it also just might be someone's house. One such ancient creature is the blacksmith, a giant tasked with creating relics out of bodies, as magic power lies within blood and bone. Lightlark is full of magic relics, enchanted objects infused with some of the creator's power. Creating one is a draining process which shortens your lifespan, significantly if the item is powerful enough. This, like the Nexus Curse, is an idea with potential, but just no follow-through. Not only do we never see anything more about enchanting, during Skyshade, the immortal blacksmith is just endlessly pumping out magical artifacts for Isla without consequence. Lightlark as a world has existed for thousands of years. The current rulers are quite young, mostly around 500. It's a safe assumption in the past that there's been rulers who have lived to be well over 1,000. Despite this, Lightlark is a world with a memory problem. No, really, Skyshade codifies the amnesia that people have for the history of the world into magical law. Here's a quote. "Even if I wanted to, I can't. The more time spent here, the more the other world is forgotten. It was by design, you see. to keep us from wanting to return. I don't even remember its name. Page 115. It's an interesting concept, perhaps, one fundamentally at odds with everything else we learned of the other world. We'll get there later, but here's a spoiler I already alluded to. It sucks over there. Making people forget everything about the other world erases the knowledge needed to return, sure, but it also makes them forget why they wouldn't want to return in the first place. The forgetting is centered around the other world, so it doesn't actually solve Lightlark's collective amnesia about other matters. So many aspects of the world exist as long lost, yet in a population with several thousand people scattered across small islands and populated by people who regularly live for hundreds of years, how is history being lost? Lightlark has 6 nations, and a generally homogenous single-language culture. Like, these guys are, as much as they have slightly different traditions in other nations, they're all kind of just generic fantasy nations. It's not much of a change from each other. There was a war once, and it ended in a stalemate. No one is conquering other lands and forcibly erasing history, they're just simply forgetting. And Skyshade has pitifully canonized that 3 books in. The book timeline begins with the creation of the world, an unknown time ago, by 3 characters with some of the worst names ever written. They are Cronin Malvere, Horace Ray, and Lark Crown. They are the ancestors of the only 3 characters in Lightlark, Grim, Oro, and Isla. Horace and Cronin fought over control of Lightlark, and the losing Cronin moved his Nightshades to a new land across the sea, which he named Nightshade. Thousands of years later, some drama occurred, and a starling named Aurora unleashed a bunch of silly curses across the land. 500 years later, Isla stumbled into breaking those curses. Isla Crown is something like 20 years old. Her mother was the wildling ruler, and her father was a Nightshade general with an immunity to curses. Isla was born with both of their powers thanks to inheriting her father's curse immunity, but her guardians, Poppy and Terra, suppressed and lied about this her entire life. One day, Isla found a magical star stick, which allowed her to teleport out of her locked room and see the world, and also meet Grim. Grim is the ruler of Nightshade, and he sucks. He fell in love with this isolated, naive 18-year-old girl whose father was one of his buddies. One day, Isla tried to save a village under attack from demonic Drex and accidentally used her Nightshade power, killing both the Drex and the villagers. The trauma led to her quickly marrying Grim. Not much later, the centennial nonsense of the first book occurred, and Grim wiped her memories without consent. He seduced her all over again, including giving her an impossible-to-remove marriage necklace, without telling her it was impossible to remove, or a marriage necklace. Isla, meanwhile, fell in love with the Sunling ruler / the origin, Oro. But don't worry about it, because, he doesn't matter. At the end of Lightlark, Isla chooses Oro, so Grim declares war on Lightlark. It is revealed that when Isla saved / murdered that village that one time, she died, and Grim tied his life force to hers. If he dies, she dies, and also all of Nightshade. Wildling and Starling would die. Isla is technically dead right now, and this lifelink won't last forever. Without telling anybody any of this, Grim decided to invade Lightlark so he could use a world-ending portal to the other world, because supposedly the dead can rise again there. It is extremely important to note he has no real source for this. Cleo, the moonling ruler / catty rival turned morning MILF, said it once. So off to war he went. After killing a ton of people for a pointless battle, Isla ends the fighting by agreeing to return back to Nightshade with Grim. And that brings us to Skyshade. Oh, and also there is a flying gay man named Azul out there. Some people thought that the book with the word sky in it might be connected to the Skyling ruler, Azul. But nah, he gets one scene and otherwise serves as an off-page MacGuffin provider. It's the same with Cleo, who has a few brief scenes and barely any dialogue. It's the same with Zed and Enya and Marin, who just doesn't even appear. To say Lightlark has side characters is to acknowledge there are names in the book which aren't Grim, Oro, and Isla. Technically true, but so aggressively shunted by the narrative that they feel as much part of the set dressing as the scenery. The scenery, however, is occasionally described. Plot. After agreeing to return to Nightshade with Grimm, Xyear confronts him immediately about her accidental massacre and his very intentional war. She's angry and shaken. It's a promising energy for her to begin the book with, because Grimm deserves to get yelled at. Yet over all of it is the specter of inevitability. Grimm is the endgame, and will never truly face consequences. Xyear calls Grimm out several times during Skyshade, and each time the complaint is spoken but not addressed. Her feelings are acknowledged, and the conversation is quickly redirected, typically into fan service. Take this opening scene a little ways into the first chapter. This is Xyear speaking first. You really would have let Lightlark fall? You would have doomed the rest of the realms while leading yours into a world we know nothing about? For one woman? It didn't make sense. Grimm frowned. Not for one woman, he spat, like the words insulted him. He stepped toward her. For my wife. Wife. The word unlocked 1,000 memories of them, a year before the centennial. Fighting, falling in love, marrying, all moments she hadn't remembered up until recently. She squeezed her eyes shut in frustration. You know what I mean. One life to risk thousands? That is criminal, selfish, monstrous. Xyear could feel Grimm getting closer. When she opened her eyes, he was right in front of her. Heart, he said steadily. The spikes on his shoulders made him look like a demon. His blood-slicked armor glimmered in the moonlight. If waging a war for one woman is a crime, then please do consider me a criminal. Closer. If killing thousands to keep you alive is wrong, then consider me a villain. She had to tilt her head to see him clearly. He leaned down. His breath was hot against her mouth. If loving you this much is my downfall, then consider me already on my knees. Page 3-4. This is just one of those quotes designed for TikTok promotion. It leaves me feeling dead inside. In theory, I like a morally gray, morally evil romance. Sure. My issue of Grimm has always been that he isn't actually a villain. He is a moron that the universe consistently rewards. Mass murder is an accessory to Grimm and the universe. Bloodbaths a meaningless concept except the end result of making Grimm look dangerous. They know nothing of the other world, and Grimm attempted to kill every single person in Lightlark on a quest to go there. He's not a dark, broody villain whose devotion to his beloved is inspired. He's just this entitled dumbass with too much power. Xyear isn't satisfied by this answer, yet the question never returns. Her thoughts dwell on him being a monster, how horrible the war was, how she had to do this to save everyone, to come over here to Nightshade, end it like this. And then she immediately decides that all of these thoughts make her a hypocrite, because she once accidentally killed some people. The books consider these acts equivalent when they aren't. They both involve mass death, thus they mark Grimm and Xyear as equal monsters. Never mind concepts like intention, or how often Grimm has proven himself to be scummy beyond this. 100 dead bodies is the same as 1,000 in the Lightlark universe. They're corpses created only so the leads can look dangerous and feel sad. Here's a quote. Ash stuck to every surface of the landscape, a layer of poisoned snow. Houses lay in charred piles like firewood. Nothing stood tall anymore. The village had been brought to its knees. Her cry cut through the silence like a scythe. Bodies, big and small, curled against the ground and hardened into rubble. Some were indefinable shapes against the stone. You did this, a voice in her mind said. Monster. No, she hadn't meant to. Memories flitted beneath her eyelashes. She saw herself visiting this site, mourning the same action in the past. It hurt. It hurt so much. She was a wound that refused to scab. She wanted to bleed. She deserved to bleed. Still, her pain meant nothing. These people were dead because of her. Because of her power. Page 2. I'm going to point out, and it's not in my script, that she was a wound that refused to scab. She wanted to bleed. If she's a wound that isn't scabbing, she's a wound that is bleeding. You are bleeding, Isla. Okay, anyways. I have sympathy for Isla. Like, it wasn't her fault, and she shouldn't beat herself up over it. Oro said that last book, and now Grimm says it this book, because Oro can't have shit in this book, not even a contrasting point of view. However, I am growing tired of Lightlark's utter indifference to the world outside the leads. How death is always framed from their pain and just weightless besides that. Grimm could kill 8,000 people, and as much as Isla might protest that and he might angst, those dead bodies will never be anything other than a kill count to this book. In theory, these were people. You know, people. But the only people allowed in Lightlark are the main trio. The pain of a town destroyed, of a devastating war, of survivors, and the less privileged does not exist. Isla's pain over causing it lasts the entire book. Also, while I'm just pointing out prose, I mean, houses lay in charred piles like pyrewood. Nothing stood tall anymore. The village had been brought to its knees. What prose. After their quick visit to the ruined village, Grimm takes Isla to the Nightshade Castle. This should have been an absolute, slam dunk of a scene, a chance to describe the aesthetics of the castle more. It wasn't really described much in Nightbane. And also, Isla's feelings entering it, her memories clashing with reality and her muddled emotions. Instead, though, we just skip all that. The next chapter opens and she's moved into the castle. Lynx is even there. The ever-jolting, random pacing of Lightlark's chapters make the start of the book very disorienting. I'd forgotten that the end of Nightbane said that they were married for months before the centennial. Because the wedding was so rushed and sudden, I assumed that their marriage was similarly just the secret, rushed thing. But Skyshade tells us no. Everybody knows that Isla is married to Grimm. There is a statue of her in a custom-built greenhouse that Grimm installed. She has her own throne. Her cousin is Grimm's general, and the Nightshade Court is all under threat to respect Isla or die. Here's a quote. "There is always a place for you," he said. "I made your throne myself." He had. She remembered it now. Grimm had crafted it with his own shadows. Hours later, she walked toward that throne like a ghost. Memories blurred, past and present, bleeding together until they were one. She remembered the outrage when Grimm had announced her as his wife to the court, as his equal, right before they left for the centennial. Grimm had made it clear that anyone who didn't respect her didn't have a home on Nightshade, and so the descent was not erased, not pulled out by the root and banished, but permitted to grow like a weed in secret. Pages 8 to 9. Grimm might have been the only Nightshade at the centennial, but those guys have so many powers, including dream messaging and mirror walking. And word about the Wildling Queen marrying the Nightshade King, a move very unpopular with Grimm's lackeys, never made it out. We meet two members of the court. His general, Astria, is covered that is Isla's secret cousin, and a soldier named Tynan. And the book makes it immediately clear that this Tynan is a bad guy who is going to die later after threatening Isla. It doesn't say it explicitly, but the way that he's introduced in a couple, 2 sentences, you just see his arc playing out, and that is exactly what happens. And yeah, by the way, Nightshades have gained even more powers. Grimm makes a permanent throne out of writhing shadows. Tynan can touch people and control them. Shadow clones can be summoned, and Grimm has bonded with a dragon, which isn't explained and might not be Nightshade exclusive, but I also really wouldn't be surprised if it was. Isla spies on Grimm having a council meeting, and overhears him promising to take Lightlark. When she confronts him, she learns that she was wrong to do so, as always happens. Her blade was at his throat in an instant. She pinned him to his throne. Her words shook with anger and betrayal. "You manipulative, villainous!" "As much as I would love to hear the end of that sentence," Grimm said, seeming unconcerned by the blade beneath his chin. "Do save your barbs for a different time, when you actually have a reason to hate me." She bared her teeth. Everything he had just said. "I'm not planning on invading Lightlark, Heart." She blinked, incredulous. "You just said—" "I know what I said. I told them what they wanted to hear, to buy some time." He searched her eyes. The portal would have saved you, and it would have also saved my people. Page 12. I am going to continue to voice Grimm in some sort of inexplicable, ridiculous voice every time, and I hope you enjoy. But yeah, dumb old Isla, thinking Grimm might be a bad guy. He's actually even more noble-hearted than before, because it turns out that Nightshade has been under attack from magical storms for centuries, and Grimm was just trying to save everybody. These storms have never been mentioned, the same as the direct threat last book Nightshade was also secretly dealing with. Just like the Drex, this new information will form the majority of the main plot. This is something Grimm might have mentioned at any point before now, especially in regards to the war, but I suppose Aster hadn't thought of it until she had started writing Skyshade. Isla pledges to help stop the storms of Grimm, and tension is abandoned once more. As part of the requisite side questing, Isla pops over to the blacksmith. She's afraid of her power and wants his help sealing it, which he does using a special glittery metal known as Shade-Made. Shade-Made metal is a thing from here on out, and yes, it is brand new to the series. When it makes sense, it makes sense for Isla to fear her power now that she's remembered the massacre. The book kind of talks about it by lying to the reader. It was so quiet. She had almost forgotten what her mind had been like without having to constantly block out the endless connections waiting to be formed around her. It had worked. Page 18. Isla had honestly pretty good control of her power during Nightbane, and it had never really been the case that her mind was full of endless connections. She hadn't had much issue losing control, and just the chapter before she felt the urge to unleash her powers and didn't. It'd be interesting if Isla properly drew from the environment around her, had actual issues where she accidentally bonded with a nearby tree mid-conversation and causes it to lash out, or if her brain was full of flower fields trying to chat to her. But that's not what we've seen, it's only what the book wants to imply. The blacksmith wants Isla to kill him, as he's been kept alive by the Nightshade curse and forced to work for centuries. She agrees, and will kill him at the end of the storm season. Grimm disapproves of her locking away her power, and they bicker about it over dinner. The arguments, though, are repeats of what we've had before. Surface-deep quibbles constantly undermined by intrusions of horniness. This book takes a mercifully long time to involve any sex scenes, and to compensate, it frequently hints at or mentions previous times that Grimm and Isla have had sex. Most of these intrusions happen during their fights, distracting from topics that matter, and providing this easy out from having to ever resolve the issues that come up. Isla's favorite foods are named, and I do find them perhaps a little too funny. They get repeated a chapter later when they have dinner again. I'm going to read you both food mentions. The meal was perfect. He had purposefully ensured her favorite foods were made. Charred vegetables, spiced grains, buttered potatoes. Page 20. Strips of seasoned meat cooked all the way through, fluffy grains, root vegetables spiraled into ribbons, and that's page 25. I don't care about food much, so I usually just parse over food descriptions without much thought, but Isla's bland peasant chow just kills me. I'm so glad that they cooked that meat all the way through for you, Isla, and I'm so glad it was seasoned. This book, Isla is frequently acting in secret from Grimm. You can't deny that Isla has agency as a protagonist, but the actions she chooses to take are continuously bad ones. She acts without thought, and she keeps secrets she doesn't need to. Secrets all later revealed with no consequence to the people she hid from. A book about a character who hides the truth and makes rash decisions is fine, that's great. But with Lightlark, the sense is never that this is an intentional character choice from Aster or something reflective of Isla. There are just no consequences to most of the things Isla does, and she, like everybody else, is only capable of falling upwards. For example, Isla is doggedly determined to speak with the Oracle about her prophecy, the one where she's destined to kill either Grimm or Oro. The Oracle is dead, and her sisters were stolen by Cleo last book. The Oracle prophecies are famously vague, and the Oracles themselves have never been helpful when questioned. We've seen multiple conversations with these guys, nothing ever really came from it. Still, Isla becomes certain she needs to find and speak to them. She also wants to know how long she will live while tethered to Grimm, if her fate can be changed, and what this prophecy could even mean. She does not consider asking Grimm how long she will live, and Grimm does not consider telling her. Grimm did call the link temporary in Nightbane, but I was under the impression it was temporary because it forced her to be reliant on him staying alive. I thought perhaps Grimm wanted to revive her so the link could be severed and she could have her own life. This is maybe true, but it turns out in Skyshade she actually has a few months to live. The timing of this is spectacular because it once again undermines so much that has come before it. Can Grimm tell she's this close to death considering the life link? Does he not think his wife should know she's about to die? This is information that would color the war as less impromptu and more of a last-ditch effort to save her life, but he neglected to bring it up until now. This is almost certainly because it had not been decided until Aster began writing Skyshade. Cleo has been sailing the seas for a number of weeks for unclear purposes and will never find out. Isla feels she needs to find Cleo's ship to find the remaining oracles. Her powers are sealed, so she plans to take a dragon. And last book, there was a baby dragon. It existed for one scene and for the purposes of setup and fluff. Since magically bonding with Grimm, he's grown to full size. His name is Wraith, and he is constantly either grinning or smiling in a way that I just find viscerally upsetting. He acts like an excitable puppy, and is only a few months old despite being, full-size dragon now. So, Isla steals this toddler and rides him out into a supernatural storm full of demons and shrapnel in order to find Cleo, in order to get answers she doesn't need and is unlikely to be satisfied with and could learn elsewhere. In fact, learning elsewhere is exactly what happens because this mission fails. The storm is a chance, though, for Aster to really flex her writing abilities. Check out this sentence. Wind rattled the windows. Rain hit the glass with the force of throwing stars. Page 37. And here's some more. The sky raged like a battlefield. Thunder and lightning dueled, one striking and the other responding. Night seemed to shatter all around her, and the rain was thicker than it should be, striking like throwing stars. Page 38. This series has a limited vocabulary, and that's a detail that is difficult for me to usually notice unless the book makes it unavoidable. Shatter, glimmer, gleam, roar. The same words and descriptions are just used again and again, making everything feel bland yet shiny. One of these repeated terms is, inexplicably, throwing stars. I always find throwing stars a very distracting term in such a Western fantasy. It's a strange inclusion I've seen a number of authors make to have shuriken exist in their world, but remove them from the cultural origin of just calling them shuriken. Isla owns both throwing knives and throwing stars, and uses them in exactly the same way. Why have both? Throwing stars is used 2 more times in Skyshade as a simile. The storm had thickened. She was pelted by metal in all directions, like an army of throwing stars, until Grimm covered her entire body with his. Page 139. Drex. They shot through the air like throwing stars, burying themselves into the creature. Page 367. And out of curiosity, I checked, and this happens in Nightbane too. They were far smaller than the dragon, but whereas the creature was graceful, these were like throwing stars, shooting across the sky, falling to the ground, talons first. Page 392, Nightshade. Look, I can give a pass to some awkward similes, but how often have you ever wanted, or ever even, compared something to throwing stars? And how often have you done it 4 times in one book? It was so eye-catching a quirk, it just consumed me the entire read. The first 3 are more close together. The first 2 are literally, on the same page if you flip it over. So when that last use came up on page 367, I was on my feet hootin' and hollerin'. She'd managed to squeeze another one in there. Incredible. Now can someone please give the editor some smelling salts so this doesn't happen again? Isla manages to make it onto Cleo's ship by teleporting from Wraith's back, leaving the young dragon to dodge through the deadly storm above until she is done. Another one of my favorite bits of prose shows up. Part of her knew the impossibility of finding anything out here, especially in the darkness, but Cleo had an entire armada. They would be together, like a legion. Page 40. Isla is below deck, surrounded by barrels of supplies, and begins opening every single barrel in search of the oracles like she's St. Nicholas hunting down the pickle boys. The best reason we have for why Isla assumes the oracles might be in shipping containers is that they were once frozen in ice, and you can put ice in a barrel. She doesn't find them, and she teleports the floor up directly into Cleo's room. Cleo's there, and informs her that the oracles are dead. Cleo now knows all their prophecy, and taunts Isla with vague, it's not even really foreknowledge, just like vague warnings of I know things, before kicking her out. In the exchange, Cleo mentions her child, her sole motivation, not gendered this book, and remaining unnamed. Speaking of a lack of names, it is worth pointing out that Cleo continues to lack a last name, same as every single person in Lightlark who isn't Isla, Grimm, Oro, or their ancestors. Isla is full of despair as she returns to the Nightshade Castle. I mean, the oracles are all dead. She'll never know what her fate is, despite knowing. She'll never know how long Grimm can keep her alive, despite not asking. In despair, she asks Grimm if he has any oracles of his own lying around. The question was asked from desperation. She tried to keep the urgency out of her tone as she said, "You don't have oracles here, right?" She didn't dare hope. She didn't dare breathe. "No," he said, and she closed her eyes, fought against the rush of sadness. Then, "The closest thing we ever had was a prophet, but he died a long time ago." "A prophet?" "His order survived, but they only speak to those who make the climb." "The climb?" "Up to their base. It's at the top of a mountain." Page 49. Not only was there a prophet, there's still all of the greybeards up on High Hrothgar. There's also the Augur, later brought up, an additional seer chilling on Nightshade. And there's another new character with visions of the future later in the book. Up until now, the suggestion has always been that the oracles were unique, at least to me. Like, the Sunling Kings froze them in ice on Lightlark to control them and their power of prophecy. Now that they're dead, it turns out prophecy is everywhere. Not only that, but all seers agree on what the future is, and the concept of fate is seen as universally just immutable. So much emphasis has been placed on the oracles over the last two books, the importance of one emerging to weigh in on the Centennial or Grimm's invasion. All of the prophecies up till now have been from them. And suddenly we have the prophet, and the prophet followers, and the augur. It makes you question why no one has consulted them before. Before Grimm and Isla leave for the prophecy side quest, they encounter Poppy and Terra. These are Isla's guardians, abusive teachers who killed her parents so that they could raise Isla powerless per Aurora's will. They're kind of my favorite duo of side characters, like in the abstract, because the majority of times they're referred to, it's in a pair. They spend all of their time together, they act together, they get referred to as if a symbiotic entity. And we know nothing of them as individuals, only the roles they fill in Isla's life as the fighting teacher and the charm teacher. We don't know what they look like. We don't even know what their relationship is to one another. Are they codependent sisters? Passionately evil lesbians? Co-workers in way too deep? What we do know is that they suck. Poppy tortured Isla until her manners were perfect, and Terra tortured Isla until her fighting was perfect. When Isla learned in Lightlark they had been lying to her whole life, she banished them in a justifiable bit of anger. In Nightbane, Grimm hired them behind Isla's back, in a scene I am going to repeat because it's just that vile. The whole thing is, it's the worst chapter. She shook her head, unbelieving, hoping she was wrong. "You have Poppy and Terra," she said, her voice a whisper. "You took them in." Grimm nodded, and her tears fell freely now. The betrayal. "You know what they did to me, what they did to my parents." "It is unforgivable," he said. "But you need them. I don't need anyone." And yeah, that's from Reunion and Nightbane, which I know the chapter because it's that bad. This is that one where Grimm smugly refutes every point of protest Isla has about his actions with the revelation he was morally right and a hero, actually. It's like abducting everyone from wildling, they asked for it and he saved their lives. Wiping memories from wildlings, they begged for it, actually. His answer about Poppy and Tara is never addressed again. Grimm deflects with flirtation and all is forgotten. And just forgiven. I might complain that Grimm isn't actually as much of a villain as he brags, but I don't think this counts either, not in your typical way of villain. Like, hiring your wife's abusive adoptive parents behind her back and claiming she needs them isn't villainous, it's just shitty. When Poppy and Tara reoccur in Skyshade, there's some bizarre retcons involved, like this is how they're first introduced. Still, the longer she stared at her old teacher, just standing there as if she hadn't lied to her entire life, the more a fury built in her bones. Hating her was easy. Tara had held her limbs to flames, had abandoned her in the middle of a storm, had knocked her unconscious with the hilt of a sword countless times during training. Poppy, on the other hand. Isla watched her guardian nervously raking her nails against her thick skirts and wanted to sink to the floor. Poppy had held her hand while she received treatment for the injuries she received while training. Poppy had hummed while making tea filled with honeycomb. If Tara had been the blade, Poppy had been the balm. Page 46. Suddenly, Poppy is coming out of this like an angel. Like, there's room to discuss perceptions abuse victims have of their abusers, but this just isn't the book for it. Isla has never made this distinction before, pre- or post-revelations of their crime. The second retcon is perhaps not so much of a retcon as just bad writing, like, isn't all of this? And it, of course, regards Grimm. He's the one who brought them to Nightshade and employed them, behind Isla's back, a fact which enraged her in Nightbane. Let's check in on how that storyline is going in Skyshade. Tara sighed impatiently, and the anger Isla had tried to bury came creeping back. I did hope surviving the Centennial would make you less of a fool. The air around her changed, sharpened. The color drained from Poppy's face as she stared somewhere behind Isla. You'll watch how you speak to my wife in our home. Grimm's voice was as piercing as the blade at his side. It would have made her blood go cold if she wasn't the wife in question. Tara didn't seem concerned that Grimm could turn her to ash without so much as a glare, as she barked a laugh. And a coward too, needing your demon husband to defend you? She stepped forward, drawing her blade from its sheath. In half a moment, it was aimed at Tara's throat. Speak to either of us that way again, and you find that you won't be able to speak at all, she said steadily. Poppy paled even further. I might have saved your life during the Centennial, but I'm not beyond ripping your tongue out of your skull. Page 47. It's like, oh my god, couple goals. I mean, wait. Isla? Who invited your abusive parents into your house to begin with? Like, it's absolutely maddening. Grimm might call what they did unforgivable, but clearly doesn't care, unless it's a chance to flex his power. The fact Grimm is the reason Poppy and Tara are here is never addressed in Nightshade. In their scant appearances, Isla struggles with her anger against them, but never reflects on who welcomed them back into her life against her will. Like, whose fantasy is this? The dark, broody villain who cares only for you, who will kill anyone for you, except your horrible parents, who is keen to make any excuse to keep around, and who you're just gonna have to get used to. It frustrates me. If you know some of my other reviews, you know girls whose abuse is ignored and often punished by the narrative is just a particular thorn in my side. Like, we all know that these books play with the idea of abuse like it's a sticker you can put on a character to make them more compelling. Grimm and his being skinned alive at 7, Isla dangling from a tree for 5 hours when she was 12. These aren't plot points of any lasting weight to the characters beyond a paragraph of angst. But what really kills me is that this is like such a slam dunk of a storyline. Are you ready for me to fix Lightlark and Skyshade? Like, check this out, because it happened to me in D&D once. What if Grimm killed Poppy and Tara? What if Isla asked him to kill them, even? Or perhaps joined in? If you're gonna have an evil boyfriend, the least he can do is murder your abusers. Isla could have conflicting emotions over the act, like relief that they're gone, mourning because they were her family, horror at what Grimm can do, horror at what she can do, anger at everything. And after, Grimm could hold her and assure her they're monsters together. And that would be an actually villainous thing to do, befitting of a dark romance. Grimm shouts, "Who did this to you?" a few times over the series, when the answer of who has always been known to him. It's Poppy and Tara, Grimm. They did this to Isla. You hired them last week, you dickhead. The encounter with Poppy and Tara is sidetracked quickly by the revelation that the one field of Nightbane flowers apparently, has been poisoned. As Isla can grow a forest from nothing with her powers, it's really not clear how they keep running out of the stuff. Grimm and Isla set out to climb the special mountain that this prophet lived on, and seek answers about stopping the storm. Isla worries how her death will now spell the end of Nightshade, despite the fact that as long as Grimm is alive, it wouldn't. She spares a brief thought on how her death would kill all of Wildling, and never thinks about how it would kill all of Starling too, even though it would. They set out through the mountain, which rearranges itself and is full of creatures as some sort of test. Everyone who has ever climbed it for the last 100 years has died, except Grimm, obviously. The mountain climb is one of the side quest chapters that the series loves. It's just a long bunch of filler with awkward breaks for horniness. The lights go out and Isla accidentally drags her hand down Grimm's entire marbled chest. He calls her wife non-stop like it's a title, and it feels really creepy, especially as she is openly refusing to act as his wife out of the public eye and has made this known. The descriptions of this environment are monotonously, they're just vague, and the eventual chase scene is like, okay, try to picture this. I'm going to read this, and I want you to really do the best you can, if you can, to just figure out, let's go. Mind's eye, this action scene, okay? Curved over creatures with talons that clicked as they crawled through the caves, their horns like crowns of daggers. They were almost as wide as the tunnels themselves. If the beasts caught up to them, Isla and Grimm would be torn to shreds. Faster. They needed to go faster. Her legs ached as she pushed forward, but it wasn't enough. The creatures were advancing. She had to slow down for fear of crashing into another wall. The clicking was growing louder. They were right behind them. Look, the walls are getting smaller. Ever so slightly. It was a gamble to see if it would continue to narrow. They ran, and Isla wondered if perhaps she had let them down the wrong path. If there was only one right one, and they had lost it. Doubt nearly choked her. Then there was a terrible high-pitched noise as the creature's horns began to scrape against the wall. Hope made her run faster. Just a little farther. They just needed to get a little... She fell, skidding on her knees. One of the horns had torn a gash down her leg. Her scream echoed through the tunnel, and she turned around, arms in front of her, ready to be shredded. But the creature was stuck. It snapped its wild teeth at her, just inches away, but did not reach her. Its horns were caught. Before she could sigh in relief, the other creature slammed behind it, sending the beast lurching forward. A moment before its jaw locked around her leg, Grimm pulled her to her feet. He examined her wound. The cut isn't deep. Can you walk? Page 53 to 54. So, these creatures have horns on top of their heads. The tunnels get narrow, catching the horns against the walls, not the ceiling apparently. Isla, whose distance from the creatures is never certain, is suddenly struck by a horn on the leg. But the creature is then immediately unable to get closer, as its horns are stuck. Another creature slams into the first, sending it forward, but this has no further consequences. I suppose it just moves forward and becomes stuck immediately again. Grimm leads Isla away, and the creatures are never seen again. This is bad. I would never call Lightlark a series which excelled at action, but Skyshade again feels a cut below what it used to be, with a number of fight scenes which are just difficult or nonsensical to parse. Isla and Grimm bicker, with Isla once more getting to air out grievances she deserves to have. How Grimm waged a war for her, worked with Aurora for her, bound their lives for her, wiped her memory for her. How she didn't actually ask for any of this, and all the Grimm death caused in her name, she doesn't want. Grimm talks about, though, how special and important and powerful she is as a reply, which isn't an answer. Here's him replying to all of her valid concerns. When she said it out loud, Grim growled with anger. Don't ever say that. Don't ever think that. You have saved more people than you have killed. You have power that threatens the gods. He frowned down at her bracelets. Even if you insist on keeping it contained, you have it. I might have saved you because I love you, but you are meant to live. You are meant to use this power. Page 56. He sounds like he's responding to her saying she hates herself and wishes she was dead, but that's not what she's talking about. He's angry she wishes he'd have ever sought her consent for any of the massive decisions he has made about her life behind her back. He's growling because she simply wishes that he'd talk to her for once. She says that she hates him, and he looks genuinely hurt. Immediately, she regrets expressing feelings she deserves to have, and the cave begins to flood. As they hold each other and begin to drown, she apologizes, and he says, I know. Because, she's the one who needs to say that. She hurt Grim's feelings, and that must be punished. This is the first scene all over again where Isla tells Grim going to war over her was stupid, and he gets on his knees with a cheesy speech about his devotion. Once more and eternally, the onus is on Isla to accept Grim, and never on Grim to listen or change. He expresses the desire to change later in the book, saying something about not knowing how to love, but it won't represent any turning point in his characterization. Grim hears Isla's frustrations, and actively chooses to ignore them in favor of going, well, I don't know how to love healthily, so there, tee-hee. The flooding, of course, leads to a scene where they're both soaking wet in a freezing cold cave and have to disrobe and cuddle for warmth. Grim continues to make creepy comments to her, and which she once more tells him to stop. Especially with the wife stuff. She glared at him over her shoulder. Stop calling me that. A leaf in a storm? Her eyes narrowed further. Wife? Yes, she hissed. No. She flipped to completely face him. What do you mean, no? No, he repeated. You are my wife. His gaze dropped to her necklace. She didn't so much as move as he dragged a finger down her throat and then across her collarbone, tracing a slow circle around the massive stone. He leaned in. His breath was hot against her pulse as he said, I'm your husband. I'm yours. His voice was nearly a growl as he said, and you, wife, are mine. A warmth dropped through her. She tried to ignore it. I don't see you wearing anything around your neck. He didn't so much as falter. That can be arranged. She gave him a withering look that didn't hold any real bite, not when his finger was slowly tracing the path from her collarbone to her chest, stopping just short of the thin fabric she wore. Page 61. And this is supposed to be hot? We're supposed to be into this? I cannot state enough that I fully understand and am fine with people into dark, evil, bad boy romance. But Grimshaw Malvere? As much as he swears he's hers in turn, that's not true. He put that marriage necklace on her when she had no memory of their marriage, and no idea it would be impossible to remove. How nice of him to equate himself as equally owned when he has never shown Isla's subservience, when he has taken every opportunity to decide her life for her, and then blamed it on his infinite devotion. Last review, I noted that there's no mention of a marriage necklace for Grim. Suddenly the idea shows up here, and settles the argument. Isla never brings the subject up again, and Grim indeed gets a marriage chain later on. Problem addressed and solved. How convenient. Of course, in doing so, it just makes Grim look even worse. We learn Nightshade marriage ceremonies typically involve 2 necklaces, and while him and Isla had a rushed secret ceremony, he had months to then get her the, potato necklace. And he didn't do that for himself. It's become that much more of a deliberate choice by Grim thanks to this retcon, and his measly promise of wearing one too feels all the more empty. It clearly didn't matter to him until she complained, and then it becomes something which shuts her up. They get distracted by flirting, because this is the only way that the books know how to resolve conflict. Forget and awkwardly refer to Grim's morning wood. Awesome. We get another nonsensical fight scene against a giant bug and get to meet more prophet followers. Or more, the prophet followers. It's a classic info dump conversation which clarifies little, mainly consisting of new information and mysterious warnings. The deadly storms come from an open portal somewhere on Nightshade, which has to be located and closed. Locating it and closing it are both unknown, and we gotta find ways to do that, more side questing. Traversing portals kills people who aren't strong enough. The foundation of Lightlark is built on countless dead bodies, which infuse the world with power. Isla asks how long she has to live, and the Xyear points her to the Augur, a former prophet follower who now lives behind a waterfall and studies blood. The Xyear also clarifies Isla is going to plunge a blade into another powerful heart, and it will mark the start of a new age. This and the constant epitaphs Isla is given, Worldmaker, Harbinger, Snake Queen, Thordtide, Stormheart, Curse Cure, Heartblade, these further paint Isla as the savior of the waking world, the most powerful and important girl in the universe. This isn't new, but Skyshade triples down on it until it's pretty clear that the endpoint of Lightlark is going to involve Isla killing the old gods and making a better world than Lightlark, perhaps dying in the process, but certainly being reborn. And Grimm will be there. Lastly, in terms of quest markers being added to the map, the Xyear informs Isla that the person who poisoned the Nightbane was a wildling, and she has to follow the snakes to find them. Goals established, they leave the mountain. This has all been one wretchedly long chapter. At the end, Isla reveals that they're out of healing potions because she sent them all to Lightlark to help post-war. And Grimm says this. "I understand," he said, and he looked like he did. Or at least, like he was trying to. Most of all, he looked full of regret. He closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. "Can you ever forgive me?" She knew what he was asking. From the moment she had arrived, she had made it clear she resented him for everything. He was asking if they could ever go back to how things were before, if she could ever truly love him. No, she wanted to say. Instead, she said, "I'm not sure." It was the truth. He nodded. She was surprised when he said, "You're right. I don't know what love is. I don't know how to love. If you ever gave me another chance to love you, I would learn. I would learn the right way to love you." Page 74. I've already alluded to this being bullshit, but let's just revel in it once more. Grimm does not apologize or acknowledge his past behaviors. He only asks if Isla will forgive him. And she does. Twice this chapter, Grimm has dismissed her concerns, and each time Isla's left puzzling if she was the one who was too mean to him. Grimm, having been abused, is once more a cudgel, dismissing culpabilities for choices he consistently, consciously, repeatedly makes. He just doesn't know how to love guys. Like, boo-hoo. I'm sorry your dad skinned you alive like 543 years ago, Grimm. Maybe you should take some time for self-reflection instead of guilting your 20-year-old wife into taking your pathetic ass back. As always, I take the tone with respect towards abuse and disrespect for the careless way Aster chooses to write it, which simplifies a very real, important, harrowing topic and turns it into edgy spectacle designed to create sympathy from its extreme nature, never to actually discuss the topic with the maturity it deserves. A common frustration of mine in books like this. After this, we quickly stop off for a Zool corner. This is his sole scene in the book, fully acting as an NPC, as he informs Isla that skylings can read the future in the clouds, know a big storm is coming, can capture storms in magic rings which allow them to be traced back to their source, and that he has a special storm-detecting bird she can borrow. I suppose everyone's favorite unproblematic flying gay icon should be thankful he's being continuously shafted into unimportance, because the alternative is him being written about by Alex Aster, the author of Lightlark. As with previous books, we're onto a section of Isla just hopping around randomly between side quests, beginning with the rumor of the traitor. She heads to where the wildlings have moved to on Nightshade, an abandoned castle which belonged to her father. A castle sat on the edge of a cove, surrounded by farmland. Its bricks were shining black, almost silver, and its towers were spiked, as if covered in crowns. A ring of water around it glimmered beneath the sun. Its door was a bridge laying across the moat, perfectly aligned with a pathway of cobblestone and patches of grass. A small village sat nearby, abandoned for decades. Page 81. Isla asks a bunch of wildlings off-page about the traitor and the snakes, until she finds Ren, the de facto wildling leader since Isla never visits. Ren is in the stable, tending to a snake-covered tree. You might think this would raise some red flags, but Isla immediately dismisses the thought. She trusts Ren. Isla then considers Poppy and Tara, but immediately disregards them as suspects. She's learned that they were put in charge of the Nightbane fields, and by Isla's logic, this means that they would never sabotage them. Those three women are the only other named wildlings. At the end of her little excursion, Isla has learned nothing, has no suspects, and no idea of what to do. She does, however, get a snake which doubles as a bracelet. Upon returning to the Nightshade Castle, she overhears Grimm having a meeting with his council. They're calling Isla a snake, a traitor Grimm is blind to. The counselor who calls her this makes the point that if Grimm's council can't speak plainly, who can? So Grimm kills him. Multiple members of Grimm's court are murdered by him or Isla in this book, which makes you wonder why Grimm has advisors at all. He has a knack for doing exactly the right thing and knowing more about them on every subject, making the inclusion of a court feel more like an obligation of the genre, and of course a chance for Grimm to murder random people to prove that he loves his wife, of course. Next on her task list, Isla decides to visit the Augur. The mountain seer told her the Augur accepts payments in hearts, so she sets out to find someone to kill. While I'm on the subject, Augur is misspelled 5 times this book, a record for a pretty key character's name. Augur with an E means hand tool, while Augur with a U is a seer. And they're such similar words, you would expect an editor might Control F to check for typos like this, like I did, and fix them. Typos rarely bother me in a book, they just don't really. But in Skyshade, it feels emblematic of the lack of editing seen throughout the book. This isn't a random word, after all. It's an important character's name. Isla heads to a random Nightshade town for several nights until she finds someone she thinks deserves to die. A skeevy guy who hangs outside of brothels and one night happens to be strangling a woman in a nearby alley. This is very convenient. Perfect for someone trying to find a morally acceptable guy to murder. And on that, another quick digression. The series and section is going to be full of them. Alex Astor spoke about Skyshade when promoting it as Isla's villain era. We all know to not trust Astor's self-promotion, but we still shouldn't, acknowledge that this was her apparent intention. And, well, Skyshade is not Isla's villain era. Surprise, surprise. From here on out, the book will push this notion of her being villainous without an understanding of what a villain even is, just kind of using it as a buzzy bit of aesthetic. Even more so than Grimm, Isla's acts of villainy fall in the category of murdering someone who the book makes clear deserves it. When she turns over her first heart to the Augur, he takes it and requests more. Rather than question him on how many, she quickly kills 3 more people, and he continues to request more. Rather than question him on how many, she quickly kills 8 more people, and then finally forces him to talk to her. All this murder is of men who are evil, by the way, which Nightshade is full of. Her powers remain sealed, so she uses her living snake bracelet and her dagger-filled pants, real description, to get the job done. It might be my favorite sentence fragment that, it's something the book triples down on. Isla wears trousers, which rather than having knives sheathed on, contain a comical number of hidden pockets full of knives. It's the most inexplicable fashion decision since her star-stick spine pocket. Here's a couple mentions. Clad in her dagger-filled pants, boots, a long-sleeved, thick fabric wrapped around her hands and forearms, a hood over her head, and a scarf draped over the bottom of her face, she whirled away with her star-stick. Page 88. Her eyes were closed as he carefully and slowly slid every one of her knives back in place, fitting them against the curves of her body in the pockets that were specially made for her by him. Page 120. His eyes darted to the corner of her room. It seemed in her absence he had noticed the pile of daggers she had taken from her pants. Page 146. Can you store unsheathed daggers in your trousers? Sure, I guess. But why would you want to? Like, you know knives are sharp, right? Like, what if you trip and land at an odd angle? Like, this is the heat suit from Unwind all over again. I don't believe daggers bendy enough to hug her curves would be functional as throwing knives either. Like, flexible blades exist. I don't know that much on the subject. But Isla does not use her rubbery weaponry in a way that suggests research was involved in this choice. Isla finally meets the Augur, who looks like some sort of lich. He's noseless, he has red eyes, and mysterious magic tattoos. He cuts open each heart, squeezes the blood out into his blood pit, and just throws the remains over his shoulder into a refuse pile. He then shoves her into his blood pit, and makes a series of cryptic remarks about how special, powerful, and important she is. I'm gonna give the Augur some sort of weird voice, I think. Your blood spoke to me in many tongues. You wear your fate like a crown of blades. Does it hurt? Your blood, all that power stirring beneath your skin. Doesn't it burn? You can defang a snake, but the poison remains. Page 96. The Augur finally tells her she has until the end of storm season, and that she can extend her lifespan by finding the portal and draining power from it. That and Xyears, yet another new concept to the universe. Xyears, S-K-Y-R-E, they are forgotten magic tattoos, which harm your soul and can kill you when improperly applied. Isla decides immediately she needs to acquire as many as possible. Before the Augur ends his info dump session, he points to a mural on the wall of what looks to be Isla, naked beyond a few tasteful snakes. This is foreshadowing for the next chapter, I guess, because that night, Tynan, the soldier introduced in the beginning who's definitely going to be killed, is killed. He attempts to assault Isla, is interrupted by Grimm, and Isla kills him. This leads to the peak villain-era moment of Skyshade, a scene which is meant to be cool and badass, but, well, this is Lightlark we're talking about. Snake Queen, she would be the villain they already believed her to be. Her black dress had thin straps and a plunging neckline. The fabric clung to her skin like a sheet of water. Its loosely curled ribbon streaming gently onto the floor. Thin, poisonous snakes curled around her waist, sliding up and across her chest, keeping her decent, slithering. Two more wrapped around each of her arms. They hissed at the closest nobles as she passed them by, making one stumble onto the floor. The thinnest snake of all curled around her neck like another necklace. Their looks of horror weren't about the snakes, however, though each was poisonous. No, they stared at what she gripped loosely in her hand, emitting a line of dripping blood next to her. Tynan's head, held by the hair. She reached Grimm's throne and threw it at his feet. Eat, she said, and the snake slithered down her body and raced to the floor, sending the closest people screaming. Their poison worked instantly, melting flesh from bone. The creatures devoured his eyes and tongue in front of the crowd. They swallowed the remaining flesh and his eyes all in front of the crowd. Ren had trained them well. Someone loudly vomited. Another fainted. Grimm forced them to watch. Isla stayed until Tynan's head was no more than a skull. Page 107 to 108. It's like so epic and cool, guys. Real villain era. Tynan has not appeared since his introduction. He hasn't done anything, and it's even hammered in after that he was actually like a serial predator who abused his powers often to assault women. The only villainous thing going on here is if we open the floor to questioning the ethics of murder in the first place, which is just pointless in Lightlark. Tynan, like every man Isla has killed for the Augur, is explicitly and solely evil and deserves death. The whole scene is trying so hard, yet it does not fit within the world or the plot. The Upper Nightshade Court, Grimm's top generals and soldiers and advisors, are horrified by this display, but they come from a society where their rulers are publicly skinned from childhood, where debauchery and violence reign, where they all just got out of a war like a few weeks ago. Grimm killed one of them yesterday. And while I will accept that these are special snakes, the fact that they devoured the entire head down to a cleanly picked skull in a few seconds really adds to the comedy of the scene. Though she doesn't need to continue killing people as tribute for the Augur, Isla finds that she enjoys it. She begins to receive offerings at her rooftop hideout and eventually meets the woman leaving them. Saoirse, the woman Isla saved with her first kill. Saoirse wants to learn how to defend herself and tells Isla how her vigilante work has saved many of her friends and made the town safer for women. And she doesn't actually say women, but it's implied. The bad people are always men, and the victims are always women. This sexism is just woven into Lightlark as a whole. As much as it's about Isla, the most powerful girl in the universe, this high fantasy pocket dimension operates with real-world gender stereotypes. Anytime there are minor characters or generic citizens, they slot into traditional gender norms. An important woman is the exception, never the rule. Especially on Nightshade, which appears to be far more reductive than other nations, with its only male rulers. Saoirse takes Isla to a bar to meet her friends. Isla's been nicknamed Heart Ripper because she doesn't have enough epitaphs, and is disguised so no one knows that she's the queen. Visiting the people at the bar with Saoirse becomes a nightly habit. Saoirse explains how the pub regulars have meetings to try and make their town better, and they all seem inspired by Isla's very direct action. Considering we won't be seeing Marin and the Khaki Rebellion at all this book, it's nice to see normal people in this universe trying to do their part and improve matters. Enjoy this nice concept while it lasts, as this is going to all take an utterly bizarre turn. But for a moment, all is well. Isla at one point asks Saoirse about Grimm, and Saoirse's reply is telling. Saoirse thought long and hard. He's fair. Much fairer than his father or any before, I've heard. Whenever there is some sort of problem, he is always the first one there. He doesn't just send others. During the curses, he himself built the tunnels with his great power. He spent years creating them, making sure we were all safe and had enough provisions. He would hand-deliver them. Page 129. Saoirse is a character who has every right to quibble with Grimm's performance and just praises him instead. She's from a town infested with evil men, so much so Isla has taken out 14 of them over like 2 weeks, and there's still plenty to go around. Doesn't Grimm, as the all-powerful ruler, have some responsibility there? Half the nation seems to rely on Nightbane the Flower daily, despite it being like fantasy heroine. Is that not an issue? Isla might be killing all these evil men, but it doesn't actually address the root problem. Where are all these bad guys coming from, anyway? Could there be something in the laws or culture of Nightshade which is resulting in so many predators? Is that something which, despite his brief little reign of 500 years, Grimm might be blamed for? But no. Saoirse loves the guy. Everyone does. This isn't the first time the book has informed us of Grimm's many virtues as a ruler. When they tour devastated villages, he talks to the people about their issues and single-handedly solves what he can. He teleports about saving people one at a time when disaster strikes. He distributes food. He's beloved by all. He is also feared by all, a demon who kills without discrimination. Late at the end of the book at one point, he notes that, he's always going to be feared and seen as this demon. But he's beloved and everyone adores him. Like, the book doesn't know how to handle this conflict of perception, so it doesn't. One night, Isla and Saoirse have a nice conversation on the roof. Isla laments her constant titles and how hard it is to live up to them, and Saoirse encourages her to remember that trying is half the battle. Her own sister died trying to save their village from a landslide. And, it didn't work, but at least she believed she could have an impact and tried. This would nearly be a good moment, but then it turns out that Saoirse has poisoned Isla. And... okay. Saoirse and her friendly crew of community organizers are in fact cultists who worship Isla as a savior, knowing her true identity all along and plotting for this moment so they can beg Isla to kill them. Saoirse smiled. He said that at the end of the world, a girl will be born from life and death. The girl will either destroy the world or save it. She would be either a curse or remedy. Saoirse's grin grew even wider. She was shaking with excitement as she said, "Don't you see? You are the girl, the one that was promised." Isla shook her head, tried to back away. These were fanatics. Saoirse still smiled as tears streamed down her face. She was so happy, and Isla didn't understand it at all. Her smile never faltered as she said, "We were chosen to help you. We have waited so long for you to be revealed to us." Page 178. What follows is a slapstick routine where Isla refuses to go along with this, but accidentally manages to kill everyone anyway. She then screams, surrounded by the dead, and this goes on to have pretty much no impact on the rest of the book whatsoever. I was suspicious from the start something would happen with Saoirse, but could have never guessed this. Something bad had to happen, though, because Lightlark doesn't like women who aren't Isla. Aurora was a traitor, Cleo a bitch, Poppy and Tara are evil. Enya existed to off-page solve problems, and Astria feels like her Nightshade replacement. Marin was a double agent for the Revolution who saw Isla as a savior, as did her maid Ella, as did Saoirse. Isla is either propped up by women of lesser status or threatened by women who don't realize they are of lesser status. And the third category of women is Enya, Astria, Ren, these competent non-threats. And I think the fact that Enya is a lesbian cannot be ignored as part of that. Like, maybe Astria is too, and they can get together. The choice to make Saoirse a cult fanatic is especially sigh-worthy because it once more reduces the role of common people into that of a faceless mass, which require Isla to save them. It's the same with the Khaki Rebellion. Rather than people trying to rise up and improve their unjust world, they look to Isla as a savior and destined ruler. I have a lot to say about this theme later, of the individualistic power fantasy that Lightlark worships, where the privileged are the only ones capable of creating a better world. But for now, let's just agree that it really sucks. There's another magical storm, so Isla and Grimm take to the skies with Azul's magic storm capturing ring. It's pelting Starshade metal, Shade-made metal it's called, shredding that several-month-old dragon's wings, but Isla insists they stay out. As she captures the storm successfully, she drops the ring. Wraith, her, and Grimm then fall out of the skies, but Grimm teleports them to safety in time. Also, Oro is here for a chapter. He snuck into a room somehow, and Isla tries to drive him away, as she feels that she's too evil for him now. The point of Oro's brief appearance is so that when Isla and Grimm get married, they can have constant sex without Isla feeling guilty about Oro. And yes, they are getting remarried. Grimm suggests it as a morale boost for the nation, and also to prove loyalty to his court. Neither of these really make sense if you think about it for too long. Nobody likes them as a couple, it seems, especially the upper court. But, whatever. We're doing this for fan service and for way too many sex scenes. During their wedding, the saboteur who destroyed the Nightbane field strikes again. As Poppy and Tara were the only people in the castle not invited, Isla decides they must be guilty and imprisons them. Grimm, once more, heroically and romantically, gets in the way of Isla's anger at her abusers. "I want them imprisoned," Poppy cried out. Grimm looked unsure. "Heart, are you—" "I said, I want them imprisoned," she said. She could feel something in her chest unfurling, rage and vengeance spreading. "Or does my word mean nothing here? Am I ruler simply by name? Is my throne a prop? Does this marriage mean anything to you?" He swallowed. "If that is what you wish." It was what she wished. Page 170. Of course, Grimm is right once more to hesitate, as we will learn later they aren't responsible for these crimes. But you have to marvel at a man who makes constant promises of how he'll burn the world to ashes for his beloved wife, cautiously checking if she's certain about imprisoning the woman she once exiled from her kingdom. Do you ever get the feeling Grimm, who would massacre nations for his true love, doesn't seem to really respect or listen to her at all? Like he maybe doesn't view her as an independent person at all? Isla heads to the library to research Xyears. We get Astria and Isla bonding as cousins, with the ever-odd reminder of the age gaps involved. Astria knew Isla's father from childhood. We don't know the ages of most of the cast, but it can always be assumed that Isla is the youngest person in a scene by a margin of centuries. Astria explains how Isla's father's room has been left untouched for decades, and Isla goes to check it out. He was into maps and exploration, and one stands out to Isla, because it has an island on it, named Isla. Isla acknowledges her name means island, and somehow I find that really disorienting. We all know Isla just means island, and that is a really basic name for a book series about a magical island. But to see it acknowledged in text feels like breaking the fourth wall. In whatever fantasy language they speak here, her name just means island too. Like, okay, people in real life are named Isla, it's a pretty name. But canonicizing this meaning, like 2.5 books in, feels like it's breaking an unspoken rule. This isn't a big deal, but it feels so weird, right? Isla checks out Isle Isla, which is a huge, untouched paradise nearby Nightshade, never discovered. It serves no purpose as a location except at the very climax, where it'll be involved in some of the worst plot twists yet. So look forward to it. With the ring gone, Isla gets back into Xyears. There's a special Xyear out there for tracking, conveniently, if she could just find it, which brings up, skittering back, another plot thread, the feather. In Nightbane, there was this inexplicable scene where Isla smashed an orb in Aurora's room and found a feather. This book, she realizes the tip of the feather is actually a nib, and writes her name in her own blood. After forgetting it for a while, she stumbles upon it and sees there's a reply in Aurora's handwriting. This plotline is then immediately disregarded for a while once more, but it eventually leads to her speaking with a shard of Aurora's soul trapped in this feather. A point is made that also Aurora apparently had Xyears under her gloves in Lightlark, and Isla had noticed them before, but this is not a detail which ever actually appears in the book, in that book. Like, I checked. I couldn't find it. We're only told that it does, because Lightlark is a series which loves to lie to its readers. Aurora teaches Isla the Xyear designs that she needs and how to create them. There's repeated emphasis how even a tiny error in their creation could remove all her skin, destroy her soul, kill her. What Isla wants the Xyear to find the Storm Ring, but she doesn't actually know the right Xyear designs for that. Despite the risk, she still gives her other Xyears to better control her powers, and removes her power-suppressing bracelets. Again, it's never felt like Isla had that poor of a control of her abilities. Like, even the description of her post-Xyear doesn't sound any different from her other level-up training montages. She stared down at the gleaming ink upon her skin, thin as a weaving of a web. With it, her abilities felt like they had been forged into a weapon in her hand, a sword, or dagger, or throwing star that she could throw with precision. Page 200. She's able to hide her new hand tattoos with shadow powers. It's worth saying that they're red, and it's worth saying that because magic hand tattoos are not exactly a groundbreaking idea in modern YA literature, considering how much she blatantly lifts from Sarah J. Maas's work, Isla gaining intricate hand decorations of her own isn't much of a surprise. With this, she and Grimm are ready for their honeymoon to the Winter Palace, once more very reminiscent of A Court of Thorns and Roses there. They reflect on how much they've changed since their relationship began. He had fallen in love with a person who had barely left her room, who had never known an intimate touch, who had never known power. She had fallen in love with a ruthless warrior who had planned to kill her at one point. Page 201. This is meant to be a romantic how far we've come moment, but it again just only highlights how kind of creepy the origin of their relationship was. Grimm fell in love with a powerless virgin with no life experience. What we should ask ourselves here is perhaps why. Grimm fell in an obsessive, destructive, controlling love with a girl young enough that her age still ended in teen. When it comes to unhealthy age gaps, it's especially about the power dynamic between them, and Isla not only was entirely powerless, Grimm was involved in keeping her that way. He worked with Aurora, who was working with the Guardians. What did he see in Isla? Perhaps Nightbane answers that vaguely. Perhaps it's because she's the most powerful, special, beautiful girl in the world. But from here it sounds like the main appeal was that she had no one other than him to fall in love with and nothing to compare it with. Grimm goes on to discuss how he doesn't know how to love properly because he was raised without it. The new, over-the-top childhood trauma Grimm brings up is that apparently every Nightshade ruler had dozens of children who would then fight to the death to decide who would be the next ruler. Grimm, however, didn't actually have to participate in this tradition. His dad learned about his flair and just killed all the other siblings himself. But it's really sad that it nearly happened, right? You might recall that the best theory we have right now about power inheritance in Lightlark is based on fluid dynamics. That every child a ruler has begins to sap their life force until the parent has nothing left. Having dozens of children would in theory reduce the Nightshade ruler into a desecrated corpse very quickly. But that obviously isn't the case. What can we conclude from this? The rules are made up and do not matter. For some reason, Isla double-checks Grimm doesn't have any children, even though he has told her this before. The Centennial banned anyone from having children, and you really think she would have learned by now if he did. But, just touching base, I guess. Here we go. She was done pretending she didn't love him. She was done burying her feelings down, hoping they would die. It might have made her a villain. It might have been wrong, but she wanted him. Page 206. And can we please take the word villain away from TikTok until they understand what it means? Isla is fully in love with Grimm once more, and Grimm in turn promises, "I won't pretend I'll ever be a good man," he said, "but I'll be good to you." Page 207. No, you won't, Grimm. They have sex. I mostly skip over these scenes when I have to cover these things, but rest assured, there's even more this book, and they're longer than ever. Even as these scenes grow more explicit, they refuse to use any terms of actual anatomy to describe what is going on. What you get is very weird extended sequences where you are extremely aware the exact moment penetration occurs, yet the word nipple is too explicit to ever be used. The right way to include sexuality and intimacy in YA fiction is a hotly debated subject. It's a complex one, and I can't solely answer it, not here and now. But Lightlark's approach really does irritate me. It feels both incredibly explicit for an age group of tweens and up, yet is deeply immature around the topic of sex. Again, the constant use of peaked chest and sensitive chest instead of nipple drives me insane. It's a holdover from TikTok culture, I think. This paradoxical obsession with spice, which demands gratuitous sex, but must be arbitrarily censored to be sold to a teen audience. They arrive at the Winter Palace, where Aster's prose once again glimmers. The Winter Palace was made of harsh arches that mimicked the mountains around it. A thin layer of snow clung against the stone and glass exterior as if it was wearing a sheer blanket, and the windows were as dark as lifeless eyes, like the entire castle was sleeping. Page 2112. The palace is abandoned, but perfectly maintained by never-witnessed staff, and has a magical hedge maze in the back, where Cronin Malvir was buried. This is the hedge maze of the hallway-like tunnel fame, ominous splits and all. There's also a library where Aurora informed Isla that she could find more information on Xyears. This section is just heavy with Grimm fan service. I could poke at it really in depth, but there's little point. What this series does best at this point is Grimm fan service. And if you squint past and forget everything awful Grimm has done, you could almost be charmed. It's pure fluff about oversized sweaters and sweet shops, functional but nothing you haven't seen before in other cozy, trope-heavy works. The highlight is this, which I think is meant to be cute. Grimm had said he wanted to show her something outside, and he motioned towards a set of clothes he had pulled from her wardrobe. She squinted at the pants that would disintegrate in the snow, socks that were meant for the inside, and undergarments that weren't at all suited for any type of exercise. "What?" he asked as a smile played on her mouth. "Nothing," she said, pulling pants made of thick leather, a tight band and shirt to keep her chest warm and in place, and a long-sleeved shirt. "You know remarkably little about how women dress, for someone who's been alive for half a millennia," she said. He had likely asked an attendant to help her create her wardrobe. Grim gave her a look. "Might I remind you, I was never meant to marry. I was never meant to have a woman in my quarters for more than a few hours." Page 228. This is a level of incompetence rarely seen, where him doing this on purpose is perhaps preferable to him being this much of an idiot. "Grim, you do know how to dress yourself, right? And you know what snow is. And you have seen what Isla has been wearing for several days now. And you picked pants for her made of a material that disintegrates in cold weather. This has nothing to do with how women dress, and instead paints a picture of Grim as someone who struggles with the concept of clothing as a whole. He didn't even pick out a shirt for her. What the hell are inside-only socks? What kind of lingerie fundamentally impedes your ability to go for a walk? And, seriously, what fabric disintegrates in snow? And what was it doing in the winter castle?" The other bit of fluff, before we move on, involves Lynx. I barely mentioned him so far because he has barely been mentioned so far, and I probably won't much in the future. As you may recall, Lynx is a black leopard, whose name and pointy ears I objected to in Nightbane. Suddenly, Grim and Isla lampshade this. "Your leopard is oddly protective of a creature that is several times his size," he said. "His name is Lynx," she corrected for the dozenth time. "But he isn't one," Grim said, for also the dozenth time, exasperated. "You're calling him by a different type of animal." "He likes it," she said, glaring at him. Page 229. This is something like reflective of something I noticed in Nightbane 2, where Grim and Isla discuss the star stick. "Fine, but only if you return my star stick." His lip curled back in disgust. "Your what?" "My portaling device." With a flick of his wrist, it was in his hand. "I feel strongly that I will regret this," he said, his eyes narrowed as he slipped it to her. She grinned, cradling it in her arms. It was her most prized possession. And that's from Nightbane. A lot of people made fun of the star stick in Lightlark, this silly named object which has yet to be ever given a physical description. Suddenly in Nightbane, the term portaling device starts being used, and Grim speaks for the audience and sneers at the name star stick, but he never actually provides a more appropriate name, if there is one. In Nightbane, myself and I'm sure plenty of others called out Lynx as a ridiculous name for a panther. Suddenly, in Skyshade, Grim speaks for the audience and points this out. It reminds me of the immovable necklace, too. Critics notice how one-sided it is, and suddenly Nightshade Marriage involves two necklaces, and Grim gets one of his own. It's become a reoccurring theme that each book attempts to fix something about the book before it, in a way different from merely retconning it. Grim and Isla's conversation about Lynx would have been fine in Nightshade, but halfway into Skyshade, it feels out of place and just targeted. Isla is looking me dead in the eyes and going, "I don't care that my panther is called Lynx. He likes it. Shut up." And, okay, geez, he can be called Lynx if he wants to be, but there's no need to be so defensive about it. In between fluff, Isla is looking for Xyear information. Aurora tells her that she needs to find a cursed book, a concept Isla struggles with on a fundamental level. "A book cursed clothes," the feather wrote. Isla wasn't sure she understood. How could a book be cursed? Page 224. Isla, who grew up in a world where everyone around her was cursed, where there's a cursed island, cursed storms, cursed swords, and people of cursed powers. What is she struggling with here? She finds the book she's looking for by accident after having sex with Grim against a bookshelf. It functions by MacGuffin rules, this book, being entirely blank except when it isn't. At one point, the book tells her bones are even more powerful than blood, and to make a powerful Xyear, you need powerful bones. She immediately sets out for the Hedge Mage in order to grave rob Cronin. Despite spending plenty of time discussing with Grim how everyone who ever enters it, except him, dies and that all power is suppressed within. She is soon attacked by a creature and opens the curse book as defense. Even though the curse has had no effect prior to this due to her curse immune powers, a demon crawls out of the book and fights the creature for her. She flees to Cronin's coffin, which she opens using her blood. Again, there's no real logic to it. Her blood is simply so powerful it can activate dormant magic items now. The coffin turns out to be empty, and Isla flees the maze into Grimm's waiting arms. Grimm asks what she was up to, and she explains that she was trying to find the portal. In fact, she found the portal, as while fleeing, she apparently realized that the empty coffin is the portal that all storms emerge from. How? Why? She says that Cronin's powerful bones probably turned into a portal on their own, I guess, and she winds up being approximately right. Like, that is pretty much 95% of what happened, and there really is the portal there. At this point, Isla finally explains to Grimm about the Augur, Xyears, the feather, and her upcoming death. He's pretty chill about it, showing that there was no point in keeping any of this a secret in the first place. The biggest complaint he has is about the Xyears and the potential damage they might do to her soul. And we still have no concept of what a soul is in this universe. Here's the thing about having stakes. You have to actually establish what they are if you want them to have an impact. It's well enough to talk about Xyears as dark, forbidden, soul-harming magic, but we all know in Lightlark a soul is just this undefined thing. It could be as expendable as a wisdom tooth for all we know. Grimm also tells her that he's been thinking about having a child with her. As a reminder, in this universe, having a child together is in fact wishing for an early death. And perhaps growing old and dying together with a child is a nice thing to do. People in the real world do it all the time, but it's so off-putting in this universe. We don't know how long it takes for you to die after your child is born, but we do know it starts the process, and Isla is 21 years old at the, maximum? It's all good for Grimm, who has lived for centuries to decide it's time to die, but Isla has barely had a chance to live. What's supposed to be a romantic, fluffy notion of domesticity here, like dreaming of peace and a future together, instead becomes an unpleasant suggestion that Isla's ideal future is not her leading her own life, but fulfilling her purpose as Grimm's wife and dying by the time she's 40. Their vacation, however, is interrupted by another sabotage from the traitor. Isla confronts Tara and Poppy about it, even though they've been in a prison this entire time. She then asks the Augur, who taunts her and says that the real traitor is closer than she realizes. Then, she overhears Astria telling Grimm that Isla is the traitor, and there were witnesses to prove it. Oh no! Twist! Isla is horrified to realize she might be the one causing these problems, and indeed be the Snake Queen the Nightshade people call her, the Snake Queen that she saw painted on the Augur's wall. This devastation lasts half a chapter, very short, like a page, 2 pages max, as we immediately learn the traitor is not actually Isla. On discussing the possible suspects while reading the book, I decided the most likely person was Poppy. Wren and her snake tree, too obvious. Tara and Poppy suddenly being defined as the mean one and the nice one meant it probably wouldn't be Tara. Too obvious. We know it's a wildling, and these 3 are the only other wildlings in existence. So, Poppy, I guess. Well, it turns out, the traitor is actually Lark. You know, Lark Crown? Isla's ancestor, one of the original founders of Lightlark, is alive and fairly well. She shows up suddenly with an army of undead and kidnaps Isla before the idea of what if Isla did bad things can go any further. Lark explains that, she explains her motives, and she is the main obstacle for the rest of the book. She has not been set up as a character, let alone a villain, but here we are. And Lark's motivations are confusing, relying on new lore and just not quite making sense. Lark explains that she's been alive, buried below Nightshade, this whole time. The creation of Lightlark as a world required the mass sacrifice of many people to sustain it. The heart of Lightlark, that confusing magical thing from the first book, was stolen from the other world and grants infinite power to the island of Lightlark. Cronin murdered his own kids and tried to give Nightshade a similar amount of power, but it wasn't enough. Cronin was meant to die to fuel Nightshade, but he instead buried Lark, sapped off her power for millennia, and returned to the other world through the portal in his empty grave. He is also still alive. I want to pause here and examine this world building deeper and what it suggests about Lightlark, but I don't know where to start. The thing is, this is lore which is both world-altering and just meaningless. It doesn't actually change anything we knew about the world previously, because it's just this new information with very uncertain stakes. I don't know what I meant to take away from this beyond that we have a new villain for this book and a new villain for the next one. Also, of course, Cronin and Lark having been alive this entire time means the Nightshades and Wildling lines have never been under threat of extinction, undermining the drama of that reoccurring plot point entirely. If Cronin was meant to die to fuel Nightshade Island, what does that say about Skyling, Moonling, Wildling, and Starling? Lightlark, which contains Sunling, has the heart, and Nightshade had Lark composting below it. By Lark's explanation, the other lands should not have been able to exist without a source of constant power, but they have. So why was Cronin meant to die, and why does burying Lark circumvent that? Is this an explanation for why Nightshades are so overpowered? Because by bringing in the heart, it suggests everyone on Lightlark Island should be similarly flourishing, except they're not, and Oro doesn't even seem equal to Grimm, who fed off an inferior power source. So, what is going on here? The answer is that I flatly do not know, and the book doesn't either. It's a twist to have Lark suddenly return alive and pissed off, to have Cronin be the source of the storms from the other side of the portal, but the reasoning does not fit sensibly with the last 2.5 books of text. Lark explains her current plan to Isla, just for the heck of it. She is pissed off that this happened to her, and wants to make the world anew using Cronin and Oro's ancestors, Horace Ray's bones. So, pause once more. It just doesn't make sense. I'm getting mixed up in all my words. It's because, I don't know, there's all these names, it just doesn't work. Cronin is through the portal in the other world, and Horace is dead. Because yes, even in the matter of important ancestors, Oro is fated to lose. Almost no one knew Lark was trapped down there. Lightlark, the world she made with Horace and Cronin, is already free of both of them. She ought to just close the portal and have a nice retirement, but instead raises an undead army to destroy everything she can. You need good bones to make a new world, but surely you also need citizens, right? But she just starts raising the ground and is like, I'm going to make a new world, and it's going to be better, I guess. Her plan is simply evil. Villainous evil. But yeah, it's nonsensical. It exists to be a climax, and so it is. Lark allows Isla to flee via a 100-foot vertical leap through the earth, emerging to witness Lark's undead army raising Nightshade. Everyone who dies joins the skeleton army, so Grimm and Isla begin portaling everyone off the island to single-handedly save the day. Isla's starstick begins glowing, and it's the blacksmith calling her over. Isla has time for a lot of diversions and further info dumps during this undead army assault, starting here. The blacksmith explains he was the one to lock Lark away in the first place. Cronin managed to lock her away because they were once lovers, and Lark was sealed away in her sleep. There's a theme emerging of trying to echo the main cast of their ancestors. Having the idea of history repeat itself, fine, but when it's constantly the same families, it does get kinda strange. Cronin and Lark were lovers, just as Grimm and Isla are lovers. Lark and Cronin both had children to continue their family line. We have to presume it wasn't with each other, though. Even if it's been countless generations, and Grimm and Isla would not be genetically incestuous if they were related to these two, if you found your great-grandmother and your boyfriend's great-grandfather had a torrid love affair, it's just a bit weird, right? The blacksmith also reveals that he's made Isla special, sparkly, shade-made armor, fitted perfectly to her measurements and full of pockets for her knives. The blacksmith says he never believed in prophecies until he met Isla, despite being a millennium-old supernatural creature in a world where prophecies are always true. Isla kills him as he finally recalls his name, Farrar, and then flees back to Nightshade. Isla has suddenly put together the pieces, I don't know how, and realized that both Grimm and Oro knew Lark was buried below Nightshade this entire time. Her reasoning is something Oro said book 1, about Grimm being the only thing standing between them and a greater darkness. That quote is something I took to mean the Dreck swarms in Nightshade, or these magic storms in Skyshade, but it's now confirmed he meant Lark. Somehow. Grimm confirms this is true. He told Oro before the Centennial so he wouldn't try to kill Isla, as her death wouldn't spell the end of the wildling line. It's also protected Grimm, as Grimm's death would spell the end, but would also release Lark, who they both knew would be evil. This is astronomical levels of retconning and changing the context of past events. I've covered at length why the Centennial made no sense, and there was never a legitimate threat that anyone was going to die during it. But even more so, this deadly game has been just defanged. Oro knew Lark was a threat, having killed thousands to form Lightlark, and they correctly assumed she'd try again if freed. Both men decided Isla could never know, in case she tried to free Lark herself. And the main theme in Lightlark truly is men deciding things for the protagonist which are for the greater good. Isla might be the most powerful, special, important girl in the world, but the ancient men who secretly plan her life from the shadows and want to kiss her are the ones who make correct decisions for the greater good. Isla is annoyed, but moves on, deciding the only move is to banish Lark through the portal. To do so, she needs the missing pages of the Prophet's Book, which is on Lightlark. This is a plot brought up earlier, but like so many other side quests, just unimportant until now. She hops off to Lightlark and leaves Grimm to deal with the undead army. What happens next is odd pacing-wise. For several chapters, the climax is forgotten, so Oro and Isla can hang out on their very own sexual tension-infused side quest. She explains her mission, and he takes her to a deadly desert beyond some golden gates that only he can open. And today, in Bad Prose, we have this. She had never felt this shade of heat before, a warmth that seemed capable of drowning her. Page 283. Isla strips off all of her clothes as they walk through the desert, an inadvisable tip for survival. A sandstorm kicks up, and they have to shelter in a cave for several hours. She takes off the rest of her clothes, as does Oro, and he sensually cools her with his moonling powers. She starts going mad with horniness, and Oro warns her that the sandstorm probably did this to her when she inhaled some of it. As evidently, this is one of those horny sandstorms, like the kind that heightens emotion and sensation. Yeah, it's just extremely contrived. Isla and Grimm continue to be eternally endgame, even as the book suggests Isla loves them both equally and could never decide. This Oro intrusion and magically induced desire feel sudden and purely for fan service. In fact, it's such fan service bait that the next chapter is Isla dreaming a flashback sex scene with Oro. There's one funny detail, though, in the scene that I want to highlight, which is where Isla asks Oro to gild her dress. True Lightlark heads may recall Oro's issue with gilding, as he once gilded a servant by accident, and thus avoids using this power because of that. And Isla is here to fix that. He knew what gilding meant to him, the trauma behind it. She wanted to take that trauma and turn it into trust. Page 290. Isla, you can't solve trauma with sexy times. That's not how this works. Except, I guess it does. Anyway, the scene goes on for a while, like seriously, like 6 pages of flashback dream explicit sex, because of course they can't hook up in the present, but Aster wants to tease out this love triangle as equal for as long as possible. I have heard that Aster suggested Isla was finally going to be picking a man at the end of this book, but she doesn't. And even hardcore fans are getting a bit sick of this, especially as, again, Oro is just never treated as equal. He's not equal in how powerful their love is. He's not equal to Grimm in power. He's not equal in terms of attractiveness or being good at sex. He's superior to Grimm in not being an abusive asshole, but the book doesn't count that as an important metric for a love interest. They arrive at the tomb where the missing pages are, once more glittering with expert prose. A palace had been carved into the entire side of a golden cliff. It looked like a castle trapped in stone. Its facade was made of thousands of sun-like symbols and countless doors. There were statues, stairs, and endless columns. Page 299. I can't decide my favorite bit of incompetent writing there. The fact that the palace looks like a castle, or the phrase sun-like symbols. I've been thinking about the sun a lot in my own time lately. And I'd like to know how you make a sun, like a symbol for the sun, which is like the sun, but not quite. This isn't just like an image of a sun, it's sun-like. And I've spent a lot of time discussing this. The tomb is only openable during the winter at dawn for a few minutes at a time, meaning Aisla needing it to access it, like the rare time it can be accessed, is absurdly lucky. This tomb is where Horus Re is buried, a name I haven't properly mocked yet for its silliness. Horus is an Egyptian sun god, and Re both sounds like a ray of light and is Spanish for king. Horus is rumored to have been buried with the finger bone of a god, and before we can worry how that works, Aisla uses her blood to open his tomb. He's perfectly preserved inside, but is clearly dead, clutching his magic bone. And this leads to one of the best paragraphs in Lightlark history. The moment it was out of Horus's grip, his body became bones. The flesh turned to ash. He became a corpse. Page 301. Absurd. Even more so in the order presented here, where he became bones, then his flesh melted, and then he, a dead body to begin with, became a corpse. Aisla has what she needs and leaves Oro behind in the desert, but he follows her. They fight, and Aisla convinces him he needs to work together with her and Grimm to defeat Lark. The gang gets together, which is to say all the meaningless side characters get in one room while the three important people set about their plan. Do you remember what Calder is like? No? Zed? Enya? The gang's all here. Grimm, Oro, and Aisla putter about trying to achieve unclear things in order to stop Lark. The boys are jealous of each other and express that through rage and shows of power. When alone, Aisla finally tells Oro about the prophecy that she's going to kill him or Grimm, and that this is why she stayed away. Like Aisla's other secrets, her keeping it this long has no real weight, because her revealing it has no weight. Oro accepts it readily, as anyone would. She also reveals that she's either going to save the world or end it, another quite pointless secret. As Oro and Aisla search for Remlar, the blue-winged creature who lives on Lightlark, they're attacked by an undead wren and an undead snake lady. We're losing women everywhere. Aisla loses her connection to Grimm and begins to freak out that he might be dead. Somehow, in the process of this and more undead showing up, Oro winds up stabbed through the heart. He seems to be dying, but Grimm shows up and they teleport to safety and healing potions. Oro will soon recover, so don't worry. They find Remlar, who has served as a lore dump for several books now. He's here to do it once more, explaining how he can spin curses and will create a special blade to weaken Lark. He also, finally, tells us about the gods. Sort of. Gods have been mentioned more and more in Skyshade, but the distinction of otherworld gods and the ones worshipped on Lightlark are unknown. There's that abbey in the first book, featured even on the map from the second book onward. The abbey had a giant eye symbol on the front and 4 illustrations in stained glass. We still don't know anything about religion on Lightlark, though they evidently believe in souls. Remlar finally gives us god lore. And oh boy, it's as sloppy as everything else, and let's just see it in full. There was once a world with 3 gods. One that ruled the skies, one that ruled the dirt, and one that ruled the great below. All 3 stuck to their dominions and lived in harmony until the sky believed it was more important. I have stars, the sky said. I have clouds. I have the sun. I have lightning. It decided it needed to be more powerful, and so it grew and grew until it ruled over both the dirt and below. It had children, and those children decided they needed to rule. Other children were born, from the sky, but also the dirt and the below. The sky's original children decided they didn't like sharing power, so they kept all their power to themselves. Anyone not in their family that had power was put to death. It wasn't until, one day, the children of the dirt and the below rose up and fought back for their power. It started a war. One of the princes of below and one of the princesses of dirt dreamed of another world where everyone would have power, not just the ruling line. They recruited a prince of the sky, and together they lured their people to a new future. Oro, you see, is the last remaining part of this original ruling line. His bloodline has all power trapped within it. If he dies, that power is released, given back. Nexus will exist no longer. Nexus was the curse that bound all rulers to their people. It made another form of rule nearly impossible. But Nexus is a curse. Killing whoever spun it could end it too, right? If it was bound to their life? Perhaps, but Cronin is in the other world, and Oro is here. Cronin. Remlar had just confirmed he was the ruler who had created Nexus. Page 334 to 335. Okay. All right. This is a lot to break down. Firstly, the gods are still unnamed, but we can refer to them as Sky God, Dirt God, and Below God. I want to highlight how poor a choice these words are as a thematic set. The sky is like a place, right? It's an up there, I don't know what to describe it as, but sky. Dirt is a tangible object, that's just dirt. And below is a direction. You might have expected the sky, the land, and the underworld, but instead we get the thoroughly mundane dirt, and I just think that's beautiful. The sky god is also certainly a choice. It implies Skyling should be the chosen descendants of the sky, but they're not. The sky claims the sun, clouds, lightning, and stars into its domain, but stars and lightning are both related to starlings. Moonlings are inexplicably left out of the sky's domain. I guess they're more connected to the sea, but the ocean isn't connected to dirt or below either. I think the ocean has to be part of the sky, but the choice to not mention it is an oversight. The sky god decided that because of its wealth of domains, it was the most important. Somehow, it grew incredibly powerful on a whim and took over the world. It had children who decided they also needed to be in charge, despite already being in charge. And then more children were born of the three gods, which are seemingly separate from the first sky children, but in what way is unclear. The first batch of sky children began killing anyone with power that wasn't related to them. It's unclear if this included the second batch of sky children. The children of Dirt and Below grew sick of this and rebelled, starting a war. The gods of Dirt and Below are conspicuously absent. Cronin and Lark, the prince and princess of the Dirt and the Below, then recruited Horus and went to found Lightlark. Their original goal is said to be to make a more just world where anyone can have power. But while non-rulers in Lightlark have powers, the Nexus curse still ensures that they have supremacy over others. As we already knew, Nexus was cast by Cronin, but linked to Horus. Why is still unknown. Cronin is shown to be power-hungry, willing to bury Lark to avoid his death, and willing to return to the other world just to harass Lightlark from afar. And so, I believe that the only solution to Cronin's motives at this point is an unspoken love affair between Horus and Cronin. Why else would Cronin link Nexus to him and not himself? What was the vision? Why was this vision of Lightlark as a place of equality immediately undermined? Cronin and Horus tricked Lark, buried her, and when Horus died, Cronin went off to the other world to cause issues in mourning of his lost love. I don't think anything in canon denies this, or confirms an alternative. Remlar helps Isla put together the rest of her plan, something we just aren't privy to, and this will be the case for the rest of the book, as Isla is about to come out with a series of planned in advance twists and moves, which would have been nice to see discussed or hinted at ahead of time. Remlar also drops this line. "You must understand something else, my dear. You are the only person living who is of the sky, the dirt, and the below. You, Isla Crown, bring the gods to their knees." Page 335. Further endless praise of her aside, Isla doesn't actually link these three domains, does she? She's half dirt and half below, but her only link to any of the sky realms is that Oro loves her. Is that really a god-quaking combination if it's theoretically achievable to any polyamorous trio? Oro can access Isla's wildling and nightshade powers. Why can't he make the gods kneel, huh? Is it because he's Oro? It is, isn't it, huh? Oro truly cannot have shit on this bitch of a Lightlark. She, Oro, and Grimm return to the war to fight Lark. They're interrupted immediately by Soren and Cleo. Soren is somebody who was in maybe like 2 scenes in Nightbane. He's one of Cleo's advisors who had no real purpose, and whose resurfacing is extremely disorienting if you've likely forgotten who he is, as he's just Soren. Isla realizes that Cleo was probably the one who freed Lark, which is super funny in that, like, somehow Palpatine has returned way. Somehow Cleo freed Lark. Okay. They killed Remlar. Isla is then captured by Lark again, and this time actually restrained as Lark forces her power-suppressing bracelets on. These things can only be removed by the person who put them on, or the blacksmith. Isla then spends a week trapped below the ground and begins to put together puzzle pieces, which aren't so much foreshadowed as out of nowhere and kind of silly. The cultists who wanted to kill themselves for her, the way the blacksmith told her she had everything she needed, the fact Poppy and Tara, after confessing to murdering her parents in the first book, now deny it. Isla realizes she has a secret extra flare. She can steal power from people she kills, including flares, and she wasn't born with her father's curse-breaking powers. She killed him, somehow, and took it. Her real flare is this murder absorption. Because she killed the blacksmith, she can take the bracelets off herself and returns to the Wildling Castle on Nightshade. There, Poppy and Tara confirm her theory. Tara sighed. Your first cry, you brought the castle down. They were killed instantly, only you returned. Her bonded. He shielded you. Lynx. It was why he had hated her at first. He knew. He had been there. She had killed his bonded right in front of him. You were born with too much power, Tara said. Your power threatened us all, yourself especially. Isla didn't understand. It didn't make sense. I never had power. Poppy's smile was sad. We ensured that. There was a metal passed down for generations, rumored to suppress power. We never had much use for it, until you. The very metal that had just been tied around her wrists. But she'd never had bracelets like that. We ground it into your food. We laced it into your clothes and weapons, Poppy said. Between that and convincing you were born powerless, you never tried to use it. We knew the dose of stone wasn't strong enough. One day you would overpower it. We trained you the best we could without it, hoping you'd be able to control your abilities once they appeared. Villainous from the first breath. The words she had once spoken in humor to Grimm were very real when it came to her. Page 347 to 348. This is so over the top and silly. She murdered her parents as a baby. Her guardians poisoned her for her own good. And speaking of, her relationship with Poppy and Tara continues to bounce bizarrely, as they are suddenly supportive guardians she feels fairly warm towards. Their constant crimes once more forgiven, even as they reveal new ones. Isla's thoughts are just as inconsistent too, apparently confused by the notion she was born with power when this was revealed to her in Nightbane. If you were to search these books for the phrase, "it didn't make sense," you would see how often Isla is flummoxed by information she very much already knew, or is so self-evident the fact she finds it hard to digest is actually the confusing part. This girl can put together clues and solve mysteries off-page, which no one else, let alone the reader, can. But confronted with basic ideas, she balks. Like, remember when Grimm told her about how the prophet followers only talk to those who make the climb? And Isla responded with, "The climb?" Yeah. With Isla's knowledge of her true flair, she's taken yet another level in badass, and the upcoming boss fight is about to get absurd. First, she pops by Isla Island. She's been visiting this place every so often to just, scream and release her extraneous power, but for the first time, somehow, she discovers a house in the center of it. There on the table is a letter from her parents. And, oh boy, it's a long story from her father's point of view, summing up the events that led to Isla's birth. Her parents are still unnamed. Most of what we approximately know is just kind of said again. He made a curse-immune necklace for Grimm in exchange for Grimm making the Star Stick. He found the evil Drex sword and wound up injured on Wildling, where he met Isla's mother. They fell in love, and her father made a second curse-immune necklace so her mother wouldn't kill him. After 3 books, we get a reference to how the wildling curse might have worked, as he says, "She still needed blood to survive, but she could fall in love with me without feeling compelled to kill me." If she's wearing a necklace of curse immunity, buddy, I don't think she needed blood so much as she just really liked drinking it. He found Isla Island and lived there, taking all of her mother's favorite plants and animals and bugs there as well until it was a lush paradise. Her mother had a flair of her own, the ability to see the future, and while pregnant with Isla, she dreamed of Isla's future. She foresaw Isla reading this letter on this day and all the importance she would have on the fate of the world. Her mother even knew Isla's birth would result in both of them dying, and her father reassures Isla they knew this going in, and they don't mind in the slightest because Isla is so special. You know how Isla continues to call herself a villain? You can't weigh the morality of a baby accidentally murdering 2 people. It's a baby. But just in case, the book eagerly assures us Isla has never done anything in her life that is wrong, ever. Her parents knew they would be murdered, and they were eager for it, just in case you were worried. Her father explains that before Isla was born, her mother went to the blacksmith and put her flare in a bottle, so Isla can take future sight as a flare if she wants. The concept of bottling flares for future use breaks so much about the world building in such an incidental last-minute mention. People inheriting flares is a big deal, but apparently you can just bottle them up for later. Like, anyone with a flare should be doing this before they die, and everyone in the family line could just be guaranteed to have a flare. I suppose we've heard making magic items takes your life force, but you're dying anyway if you have a kid, so you might as well. It helps to have a blacksmith, though. In Nightbane, he was this hulking, intimidating monster who lived on an isolated, perilous hill. In Skyshade, he's the MacGuffin factory. He's just visited by everybody in the cast for quick, easy magic items. And the letter ends with this sentiment. "You might be wondering how I can be so cavalier about my imminent death. The truth is, my regard for my own life is nothing compared to my regard for your mother's. From the moment I met her, I loved her. From the moment we were married, I swore to protect her from anything that would ever cause her danger. I have killed anything that ever sought to harm her. There can only be one person I have loved more than your mother, Isla. Only one person I could bear losing her for. And that is you." Page 356. Is this cute? Heartwarming? It sounds unhealthy. I suppose it's a running theme in Lightlark, as even her parents' relationship echoes hers and Grimm's. Devotion defined by murder, love at first sight to an obsessive degree. I think it's also quite funny that it's so hyped up how powerful wildlings are as these, these wild women. And Isla's mother still had to just rely on this Nightshade guy to protect her and do all the killing. Great. And I know that they had a psychic vision telling them Isla was going to be the most special, important girl in the world, but honestly, loving the unborn daughter who's going to kill you and your wife more than your perfect wife is kind of weird, right? Like, you don't even know her, man. She's honestly really unpleasant, destined savior or not. Isla takes her mother's flare vial, but it isn't mentioned again. She doesn't use it. And I get that seeing the future is kind of stressful, but when it comes to saving the world, I really think you just have to deal with it. Isla is obsessed with her destiny and future, and spent a large portion of this book hunting down people with the power of prophecy. Her mother seeing the future actually seems distinct from generating cryptic prophecies. Like, her mother apparently had clear, helpful visions she felt certain the meaning of. All the oracles just spout random bullshit. I don't see the downside of breaking this vial. If fate is immutable, as it generally is presented to be, you know what to prepare for. If the future isn't set in stone, you know what path you're on and can work to circumvent it. Instead, Isla pockets it and runs off to fight the final boss. I mean, not yet, of course. First we have another long, explicit, grim sex scene. The undead army is razing the island as we speak. There's a repeated mention that he frequently shatters all the windows in the room when they get busy, And more than once, Isla dissolves Grimm's clothing into ash, a material I certainly wouldn't want all over my bed. Though they are rarely in bed, the majority of the scenes are inexplicably against walls, windows, and bookshelves this time. Now it is finally time for the final battle. Grimm is dressed accordingly. He wore sheets of metal and armor with a sword on his back, its hilt peeking over his shoulder. He looked like death itself. Page 361. Personally, I'm imagining the metal sheets in question were corrugated iron. The regular people have all been saved by Grimm, leaving the important people and side characters to fight. Isla makes even more Xyears on herself. She's perfected the art, of course. Because a magic tattoo lets her do it is much easier to write than training or world building. My favorite side character is officially Zed, who I joked about being Sonic the Hedgehog last book and who has somehow heard me and tripled down on this. She jumped, nearly losing her balance, only to find Zed lounging behind her, hands resting behind his head, like there wasn't a battle beginning beneath them. Then he fell right off the side of Wraith's back, shooting across the clearing in a streak of blue. He landed in the center of bloodless soldiers and cut them down with a curved blade crafted from a sharp wind. It was almost casual the way he fought, never faltering, never looking like he was exerting too much effort. Page 364. Isla is riding on Wraith's back, while Lark is riding on the back of a six-headed draconic monster I'm gonna dub Tiamat. Isla reaches into herself and becomes even more powerful, glowing and surrounded by all the elements. She called it forward and her chest glowed, the Xyear's star-like pattern shining through her clothes, through the sky like a beam of light. She was engulfed in power, brimming with it, like she had swallowed the sun and moon and stars and sky and all the universe between them. Her back bent, her arms splayed out, and she launched it all toward the sky in a beam of unyielding, otherworldly strength. She was the lightning. The world thundered in response. Page 365. It's meant to sound cool, but instead it's silly. Like, nothing about this has weight to it, the feeling of impact. It's like listening to children play at recess, making up new abilities on a whim. Isla has grown exponentially powerful at such a rapid pace, the concept of power has lost all meaning, and following the action is not something with tension because the stakes of any of this are just impossible to predict. Anything could happen, and will, like her surprise attack as she wields the Drex sword. Some of the Drex surrounded her, like a legion, illuminated through the storm by the rings they carried in their talons. Azul's rings, hundreds of them, hundreds of storms, power trapped inside that she could unleash, even in the metal, that she could control. She lifted the sword again, in command, and the orbs all shattered. Energy filled the sky, freed from the stones. Each storm orbited around her like rings of ability, so fast they became streaks of color. With a roar, she shot them all forward at the mountainous beast. One head was slayed by a blizzard concentrated into a blade, another by the force of a tidal wave she had morphed into a scythe, a third by a hurricane that went right through one of its throats. Storm after storm attacked the beast at every angle until there was only one head left. Wraith flew between two headless necks, turned sharply, and from her place standing on its back, the storm wind she now controlled keeping her balance, she made a blade of monsoons and floods and twisters and chopped the final head off herself. The beast dropped from the sky, taking Lark with it. Her storms raged, painting it her own shade of oceans and snow and hurricanes and sandstorms and ice, all controlled by her, all melting together to create the storm to end all storms. Arms shaking with strength and effort, she shaped them into a single orb she shrank down before adding it to her belt. Page 367 to 368. Wow. Epic. Badass. Do you think that Legion of Drex was anything like an armada, or what? That orb doesn't come back either, by the way. The fact that she can condense a storm into orb form is just one of those, well, that might as well just happen kind of things, which this entire climax is full of. Sure, I guess. Tell me more, kiddo. It sounds awesome. Isla lands to look for Lark's body, and tells us the plan is to meet Oro and Grimm at the blacksmith's forge for unknown reasons. When she pops into the Winter Palace for unknown reasons, she's attacked out of nowhere by Cleo. Lark shows up to taunt her, and Lark is then dismembered by Cleo. The sequence of events here is a mess, even before we get to the part where Cleo turns against Lark. You might be curious what's going on with Cleo here, who spoke only one sentence in her previous scene and only one in this scene. Well, good luck. We don't know. Cleo's motivation and character has revealed static since the reveal in Nightbane she had a dead child she once revived. She likely joined Lark on that promise, and probably joins Isla on the same promise. Probably, because we obviously do not get to know. Like, look at this. I can't hold her for long, Cleo said. Go, and don't forget your promise. I won't. The night before, she had visited Cleo and made her a promise. Page 371. Yes, that is the end of the conversation. I'm not just cropping that to be funny. That's it. That's all we get. The plan involved to get to this point is so convoluted, I actually wrote it out and then I just scrapped the explanation for being too dull. It doesn't really make a lot of sense and it's just such a mess. But anyways, Isla has repeatedly mentioned the need to get to the blacksmith's forge in order to meet up with Grimm and Oro. But this turns out to be a lie. To the men and to the reader, because this is something she continuously thought about, never said out loud. She just kept thinking about it the entire climax, while secretly knowing it was never her plan. Her actual plan is to lure Lark into the maze, where they have a final confrontation. Lark can't die in this world for some reason, but can in the other world, and Isla is here to kick her through the portal. First, however, there's room for yet another nonsensical twist. Remember Aurora's feather? Because Detective Isla has solved yet another impossible case. It took me a while to figure it out, Isla said, but then I realized Aurora must have tried talking to you. She must have found out about you somehow. She must have considered freeing you to get what she wanted. She was startling. She wouldn't have put part of her soul in something like a feather, but you would. And you used her handwriting as your own. This was how you knew where I was. You were already rising, spreading poison through Nightshade, but you couldn't get out. My blood. It freed you, didn't it? When I pricked my finger. Page 377. These are outlandish assumptions, which of course are all entirely true. Her source for it seems to be vibes. Why wouldn't Aurora, power-hungry and willing to try anything, why would she shirk away from putting part of her soul in a feather? What about starlings makes them despise quills? And what about Lark makes her the perfect candidate? We obviously do not see the majority of conversations Isla has with the feather Aurora, but the handwriting was perfect, and there was never a suggestion the way it wrote sounded out of character. Isla only activated the feather with her blood after the Nightbane fields were destroyed, and the idea of a traitor wildling had already been suggested. Already rising indeed. Isla using the feather doesn't change anything in how the traitor operated or how powerful her sabotage was. Yes, Isla's blood can open tombs, that has been established, but that is the sole concept in which this reveal has been set up or makes sense. We also learn that the Augur taught Isla how to infuse her blood into Cronin's tomb, that the portal could only be closed from the other world, that the Drex sword has Cronin's blood in it and can be used to find him, and what the name of the other world is. This is all stuff she learned off-page. So, the name of the other world. I'm going to allow a brief pause here. I want you to think. I want you to guess. Let's just really mull it over. I'm certain you can get this. Okay. The other world's name was Skyshade. Page 379. Yeah, of course it is. This might as well be the end of the book, but there's actually two anomalies left to address. Before and after Isla's final chapter, where she jumps through that portal, we get point-of-view chapters from Oro and Grimm. It's been revealed that there's going to be a bonus Lightlark book coming in 2025, and these POVs only cement my certainty that this book will be from Grimm and Oro's perspective. The hint Aster is given is that this book is for fans of both men. That further confirms it to me. Probably, it'll be scenes from the books, retold from their perspectives, with some new chapters thrown in. This is already a fairly common thing in YA, so yippee, I'll read and review it. If we take the two POVs this book has as a sneak peek, then oh boy, Grimm and Oro's voices are flat. It's not like Isla is bursting with character, but these men read exactly the same, and their chapters do not add anything meaningful to the story beyond reiterating information we already know. Like, they're both such dull little chapters, I'm reluctant to even quote them, because I'm not sure there's anything worth commenting on within them, but also for the sake of examples of how bland I find them here. He had tried to claw his way through the creatures, stabbing them with his sword, but their skin was nearly impenetrable, and whenever one fell, it was replaced. Oro battled next to him, roaring as the Drex tore him apart with their talons, but he did not falter, and neither did Grimm. There was a great crash and growl behind them. Isla's leopard had followed them. He ran towards the maze, towards her, as if he could feel something neither of them could see. With his great size and might, he broke through the Drex, and Grimm and Oro followed. With every turn, the leopard crashed into the hedges, cutting them in half, but the creature did not slow. He could smell them. He could smell her, and they followed. Grimm was powerless to portal. He was powerless to turn all the hedges to ash. All he could do was run as fast as he ever had in his life, next to his enemy, whose devastation he could see was as sharp as his own. That's page 380. And with that, I inch closer to freedom, as this is the end of Skyshade's plot. I've seen other reviewers come at this from the angle of it being extremely bad, but kind of getting boring. And it's true that since the heyday of mocking Lightlark, more and more people have dropped away from paying attention to it. How much fun is there in critiquing a book that refuses to try and get better? Isn't this all the same thing again and again? And yes, it is, and I get it. But also, Skysshade has probably been the most engaged I've been in the series, because 3 books in, and Aster's quirks and patterns have become obvious in a way that I find fascinating. I love bad books, and I don't just love laughing at them, though that's a benefit. Bad writing as a concept has been one of my special interests for most of my life, before I really even had media analysis to know what it looked like. I just find it interesting when something doesn't work. I find it easier to break down why something fails me than why it, succeeds to me. And I think one of the best ways to learn good writing is to try and understand what it means to be bad. And writing may be subjective, but there is still a certain level of craft required to be good at it. Everyone has different tastes, enjoys different styles and genres and kinds of prose. We are far more unified on recognizing when something doesn't work, even if we can't always articulate why. A poorly written sentence is simply that, generally, while a well-written sentence can be read in many different ways. Some people might feel passionately about it, but much more interpretation is allowed. Where something that's just misspelled, just a bit nonsense, just bad. You will still find people who enjoy books that I would say is bad, obviously. Writing is subjective. But I'd love to take a Lightlark superfan to court and just hear them defend "The tunnel was like a hallway that split ominously." Most people enjoying books like this are enjoying the romance, the escapism, not looking at writing as something that needs to be well crafted, but rather as a tool to imagine some sloppy makeouts. And that's okay, I suppose. Whatever, I'm not really here to fight tweens, I'm here to fight Alex Aster. Because the other factor about Lightlark, which fascinates me, is that it is successful. Not as much as Aster suggests. I mean, check out the Goodreads stats for Lightlark versus the very, very similar later released Powerless, but she's certainly making thousands of bucks off of it. And it's bad. The prose is worse, the retcons keep coming, and every step she has to prove herself worth her fame, she fails and is rewarded anyway. The drop in quality with Skysshade is astonishing. It's evident in every aspect and marred by laziness, and apparently an editor in the throes of hibernation. And it's here. Anyway. Oh heavens, it's here. Anyways. There's a few things I want to discuss beyond the plot, though. The strange prose, the troubling themes, and the future of the series. The prose. I have brought this up time and time again. I know I sometimes tend to repeat myself in these long reviews, but there is something wrong with Skyshade's prose, and it is especially striking when compared to the books which came before it. I'm going to suggest something up front, which I do not believe, but should be discussed, because I know I'm going to get a lot of comments on it otherwise, and there's probably already been some at this point. So, does Skyshade's prose sound like generative AI to anyone else? It wasn't something I considered until a reviewer pal whose opinions I trust brought it up. The descriptions in Skyshade are bad, but they are especially weird. Sentences make approximate sense, but only if you squint. I don't usually break down prose in full, but let's really mull over this one paragraph from Skyshade, okay? It's one I've read before. A castle sat on the edge of the cove, surrounded by farmland. Its bricks were shining black, almost silver, and its towers were spiked, as if covered in crowns. A ring of water around it glimmered beneath the sun. Its door was a bridge, laying across the moat, perfectly aligned with a pathway of cobblestones and patches of grass. A small village sat nearby, abandoned for decades. Page 81. So, let's walk through this one. First, a castle is on the edge of a cove, surrounded by farmland, and at the end of the paragraph we also learn there's a village somewhere nearby. The separations of these broader scene-setting details is just unnatural feeling. The castle has shining black bricks, which are almost silver. I kind of know maybe what is meant by this. The sun on a very reflective black surface looks white, and that could perhaps be silver. But, huh? Would you ever describe something like this? The towers are spiked as if covered in crowns. I mean, that honestly feels wholly Aster. She loves comparing pointy things to crowns or daggers instead of just leaving it as spiked. A ring of water around it glimmered is the oddest way I've ever heard a moat described. And the next sentence where moat is used plainly is confusingly shy of the word drawbridge. But what else could its door was a bridge laying across the moat mean? The rest of that sentence details how the drawbridge is perfectly aligned with a cobblestone path, which is once more a very unusual detail to include. Like, how often are roads misaligned to bridges? It's not only perfectly aligned with cobblestones, but also patches of grass. An image which just doesn't parse. Like, where are these patches? Are they mixed with these perfect cobblestones? I assume she means grass is poking out between, but patch is not the word for that. That implies a much larger scale. The reason we shouldn't actually accuse Aster of using AI to help her write her book is that any bad writer could write something like this. Human ingenuity allows for an amazing scale of incompetence, and indeed the idea of assuming bad writing must be AI, it brings to mind for me Hanlon's razor, which is this sort of idea, which is never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Aster has never been a good writer, and so the assumption her producing bad writing must be down to AI is really discrediting her ability to simply be bad at writing. This book was rushed and barely edited, whether or not she hit up ChatGPT and asked it to describe a castle. What we can say for certain is that it's a bad look if your writing is so incomprehensible and inconsistent, it could sincerely be mistaken for generative AI slop. For comparison, though, let's look at the previous books. The series has always lacked descriptive prose, but there are a lot of castles and palaces, and I've chosen them as our examples because there is a huge shift in how she writes about them. So here's a castle in Lightlark. The interior of the castle looked like a sun had burst inside and bathed the walls in its glow, in ode to the sunlings who had built it. Everything was gold. Buttery sunlight spilled from long windows, coating the foyer in glittering light that reflected off the smooth, shining floor. Chapter 2 of Lightlark. And here's another. The ice palace sat perched above, watching her as closely as the moon. The paths were carved out of mother of pearl, lined with marble statues depicting sea creatures with winding tentacles, fish-tailed women, and ships floating on nothing. Chapter 18 of Lightlark. And one more. A castle sat nested comfortably in the clouds, with spires pointing at the sky like quills ready to decorate a blank page. A waterfall spilled from the front of the palace in an arc that reflected every color imaginable into a shimmering pool below. That's from chapter Choices in Nightbane. While it's hard to find equivalent comparison points, her previous castles have been whimsical and highly thematic. I'm not going to grill the prose of them hard, but it's just obvious that they're better. They're more evocative. There's a broader selection of words going on and, concepts of how they're described. And just as a reminder, I'm going to bring up some of the descriptions of palaces I've already read from this review. From Skyshade. The winter palace was made of harsh arches that mimicked the mountains around it. A thin layer of snow clung against the stone and glass exterior as if it was wearing a sheer blanket, and the windows were as dark as lifeless eyes, like the entire castle was sleeping. Page 212. What do you mean, harsh arches like the mountains around it? Are we talking triangular arches? Are the mountains rounded but harshly rounded? Since when is snow sheer? And aren't lifeless eyes and sleeping rather contrary ideas? The books may have never had evocative prose, but Skyshade's is just dull in comparison. It's unspecific and vague, and every time it grasps for something unique, the description just doesn't quite work. Again, a palace had been carved into the entire side of a golden cliff. It looked like a castle trapped in stone. Its facade was made up of thousands of sun-like symbols and countless doors. There were statues, stairs, and endless columns. The palace carved into a stone cliff looks like a castle made of stone. Somehow we know there are thousands of sun-like symbols, but countless doors. Using both in one sentence implies they are contrasted on purpose, that the viewer is certain about the thousands, but couldn't begin to guess at the door count. There are statues of unknown subjects in quantity, unknowable stairs, and columns without end. This is bad writing. I think it's easy to suggest Gen AI and impossible to prove. AI checkers do not work, and overwhelmingly just discriminate against people who speak English as a second language. And that's not relevant to Lightlark, but it's worth pointing out, by the way, they're not good. The thing is, people are very bad at identifying AI content. I get comments accusing books written pre-generative AI of using it. And when I covered Skyshade's cover, the overwhelming sentiment of viewers was that AI might be involved. And actually, there are 3 professional designers credited with the cover to this book. I have no idea how that works, but they're all legitimate artists. It's just a bit janky looking. And it's the same with the writing. This stuff is bad. It's janky. But she is perfectly capable of achieving that jank on her own. The themes. Skyshade has continued to reinforce a theme I find particularly unpleasant, especially in modern YA literature, and that is the glorification and worship of powerful bloodlines and privileged elites, and this emphasis on individualism over the collective. No, it's not new in the slightest to have a single girl save the world. YA dystopia from the 2010s was all about teen heroes single-handedly bringing down the government to save the day. And no, it's not new to have royal leads born for destinies written in blood. All of these too are tropes, things which may be executed to varying amounts of success. The way that Lightlark handles these tropes and topics, however, deserves discussion. Like, consider dystopia. The emphasis there was on a singular teen hero, but as an extension of a larger rebellion against an unjust system. Often the teen inherits a rebellion and happens to cinch the moment of revolution, and if there is no pre-existing rebellion, it falls on them to stand up and create one. The messaging here, even poorly executed as many in the genre were, was about questioning and acting against oppression, and a mix of showing the good an individual can do, and the sense of you aren't alone for wanting change. Lightlark is more of a fantasy dystopia, a subgenre which remains fairly common while the traditional light sci-fi teen dystopia has faded. Lightlark is not alone in being about magical royalty and systems of oppression based on who has power. I can name like 5 series that will fall under that, and more if you extend magic royalty to include non-humans, such as Fae. Often this will have a girl with no power who later learns she has all the power. And yeah, often she becomes or learns she is royalty, if she isn't just born into it. Isla is not that new or significant of a protagonist, but she's the one we're discussing. And golly, the way that these books engage with the topic of power goes beyond the margin of, it's just fantasy escapism, who cares, to me. Lightlark is a book series about how people of certain bloodlines are born to be better than anyone else, that those with an innate privilege of power are more capable, more beautiful, more suited to lead, and that this is predetermined specialness designates them as the only people able to create change. Am I laying it on a bit thick? Not really. Individuals with a natural-born position of power are the only heroes present in the series, with the main characters being the 3 most important, sexiest people in the universe. Everyone is either royalty or born with a flair and elevated for it, and flares explicitly are extremely rare outside of nobility. There is the Nexus Curse, which reveals rulers are parasitically bound to their populace as a threat. Though called out as unfair, it is primarily used as a burden on the rulers, not the people. Isla Cursebreaker has a lot going on, but addressing that one is just not on her list. When breaking it is brought up, it's only for Isla's angst and the question if she could ever kill her love for the sake of freeing every person in the world from a lifelink with their monarch. The Nexus Curse keenly does not suggest at any point that the rulers are undeserving or siphoning power from the people. Some rulers are bad people, and it is sad if a ruler dies that their people die too, but some rulers are good, and all are born with innate abilities which simply make them better than the people below them. The main trio are descendants of all-powerful gods. Rulers the book ensures every side character praises for their incredible leadership and heart. They might be privileged, but that only makes them better at fixing injustice when they learn about it. Eventually, if it suits them. At no point is there a threat that to achieve justice for the less privileged, the rich and powerful must give something up. They get to fix everything while never losing status or involving those below them. The adoration that Lightlark has for powerful elites especially stands out when compared to the treatment everyone else receives. You're lucky to get a first name if you're not upper class. The book brings up the idea of not everyone liking their rulers, of a rebellion, of regular people taking community action, and makes the solution the same for all of them. Isla is different, and everyone loves that. Marin and her rebels worship Isla as the only person able to end the curses. Saoirse and her friends worship Isla first as a vigilante, the first person to ever stand up and start killing evil men, and then further as a religious figure they kill themselves in service to. These are what regular people are in Lightlark, fully dependent and loving of the most powerful person in existence because she's a good one. The messaging is just the same again and again, that some people are born lucky enough to matter. And isn't that beautiful? Don't they deserve it? Isla's power and importance grows and grows, and as much as she tepidly complains about not wanting this, it's treated as this wonderful, inevitable thing for the good of humanity. We are happy Isla is an all-powerful goddess. It was in her blood to decide the future of reality. We love this, and she's doing such a good job, as the only person capable of doing a good job. So, maybe it's not a good job so much as the only job we're gonna get. And we love this. Perhaps there is some bitterness in me, a distaste for people who believe wealth and status give them the right to rule others, some mysterious irritation at the way some people can gain followings which indeed believe that just one good rich guy can solve anything, and only through unchecked freedom of power. And maybe some of this feeling has bled into Lightlark. As much as I accept reading purely for escapism, it's like prose. We should be able to tell the difference between good and bad executions and maybe have higher standards for ourselves on what we consume even with our brains turned off. Like Lightlark's misogyny, this isn't going to be really intentional on the part of the author. It's a reflection of the genre, unconscious bias, and the themes the author has chosen to engage with. I did not force Alexander at gunpoint to include the fact the starlings were treated as slaves for hundreds of years, only for Oro to have solved that off-page before it was mentioned, and for that concept to never return again. She didn't have to have a rebellion at all if she didn't want to engage with why rebellions exist, and if there might be a good reason for one on Lightlark. She included these details because they're common in the genre, the kind of thing a book like hers brings up at some point. Unfortunately, writing without thinking about what you're writing leads to stuff like this. An individualistic power fantasy so caught up in the majesty of status it just feels insulting. Certainly, in bad taste. The future and the end. You know I'm still here. I have always been here, you have always been here, and now you will always be here. The next book after Skyshade will likely be another split narrative like Nightbane. Iceland, the Otherworld, the men doing little at home. Throwing your lead to a dimension you've established jack shit about is a great way to make it impossible to predict what will happen next. It's also really convenient if you haven't planned what the Otherworld is like, because now 99% of it will be new information you can quickly make up as you write the book set there. At the moment, we're on track for Book 4 to come out at the end of 2025, the same time every Lightlark book has released a year apart. I brought it up at the beginning, and as we approach the end, I would like to reiterate how breakneck that is in the world of publishing. A book published from one of the big 5 publishers, it typically takes over a year of production before hitting the shelves. This estimation does not account for how long it takes to write the first draft. This is like submitting it to the publisher and all of the work they have to do before it actually gets out. Some people write fast, and that doesn't indicate they are a bad writer, but this is an incredible amount of work to do in a very short time frame. Beyond Lightlark 4, Alex Aster has her adult debut coming out next year, and a bonus Lightlark book as well. Even if she was a fast yet meticulous writer, it seems unlikely she's also poring over drafts and redrafts. I always want to err against making any direct accusations or assuming too much. I mean, I avoid researching Alex Aster, and I don't want to start anytime soon. I don't know her, and she doesn't know me, ideally. But if you're a fan, wouldn't you rather have an author who cared enough about their writing to edit? A team which prioritized satisfying storytelling and quality writing over consistent fourth-quarter profit? Shouldn't we want to lift up people who are passionate about writing over people who just can't be bothered but write anyways? I don't know if Skyshade will have any impact on the success of Lightlark as a whole. We will get that 4th book. Maybe the current, more lukewarm reaction from fans and critics alike will make her and her team consider delaying the next book, or at least trying harder. If I had to guess, the goal will be 5 books. The final one, where Isla ascends into godhood, makes the world perfect, and then steps down to have all of Grimm's children. And I'll be there. Then, I'll still be there.